Your services are no longer required. The words hit me like a slap across the face. My stomach dropped so fast I thought I might vomit right there on the polished mahogany conference table I'd personally selected 3 years ago. 15 years of my life. 15 goddamn years building this company from the ground up, and they fired me with 7 words and blank stares. I looked at each face around that table. Men I'd worked alongside for over a decade. Men whose children's birthday parties I'd attended. Men who'd called me at 2 a.m. when projects went sideways, knowing I'd fix their messes. Now they wouldn't even meet my eyes. Except Warren. CEO Warren Blackwood stared directly at me, his face a mask of corporate indifference that didn't quite hide the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. Satisfaction. The bastard was satisfied. My name is Maggie Lanier. I'm 43 years old, and until 9:17 a.m. that Tuesday morning, I was the Chief Operating Officer of Meridian Healthcare Solutions. Before I continue, if you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're from and subscribe to hear stories that'll make your blood boil and your heart race. We've decided to take the company in a different direction. Warren continued, his voice carrying that practiced CEO gravitas that once impressed me. Ethan will be stepping into your role, effective immediately. Ethan fucking Donovan. Warren's son-in-law who'd been with the company all of 7 months. The same Ethan who'd asked me last week what HIPAA stood for. The same Ethan who'd been handed a VP title the day after he married Warren's daughter Kira. I see, was all I could manage, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. And when exactly did the board vote on this? I looked pointedly at Thomas, our CFO, who had texted me just yesterday about our afternoon coffee ritual. Thomas suddenly found his notepad fascinating. It was decided last night. Emergency session. An emergency session I wasn't informed about. A session where they voted to replace me with a 32-year-old former hedge fund brat whose greatest achievement was being born with the right connections and marrying the right woman. HR has prepared your separation package. Warren slid a thick manila envelope across the table. Generous, I think you'll find. We're not monsters, Maggie. No. Monsters would be more honest about their intentions. I didn't touch the envelope. 15 years, I said quietly. I was here when we had 17 employees working out of that converted warehouse in Somerville. I personally signed our first hospital contract. I flew to Singapore with food poisoning to save the Eastwood deal when nobody else could. The room grew uncomfortably silent. I could almost taste their collective guilt, bitter and metallic. We appreciate your contributions, Warren said mechanically. But Meridian needs fresh perspectives now. The healthcare landscape is changing. Fresh perspectives, I repeated. What he meant was his daughter wanted her husband in a corner office. What he meant was I'd grown too powerful, too essential. What he meant was I threatened him. I stood up, my legs surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. I'll clear out my office. No need to rush, Warren said with artificial kindness. Take the day. Security will assist you. Security. As if I might steal something. As if I hadn't given this company everything I had. Weekends, holidays, relationships that withered because I was always working. I'd missed my father's final birthday to close our Series B funding. I'd postponed freezing my eggs until it was too late because next year will be calmer. My life had become Meridian, and now they were escorting me out like a criminal. I walked back to my office, past the curious stares of my team. My team. Not anymore. News travels fast in corporate corridors, a digital telegraph of whispers and Slack messages. Already I could feel people pulling away, recalculating their allegiances. By noon, my closest allies would be sending congratulatory emails to Ethan. My office, with its view of the Charles River I rarely had time to admire, looked suddenly foreign. The awards on the wall, the family photos, mostly nieces and nephews, no children of my own, the emergency heels under the desk, artifacts from a life I'd been exiled from. I grabbed a cardboard box from the supply closet and began the humiliating process of packing up. 15 years reduced to a single container. The nameplate from my door. The lucky pen I'd used to sign our first $1 million contract. A framed photo of our original team, most long gone to other ventures. Most, except me. loyal, dedicated Maggie. My throat tightened as I reached for the small jade plant on my windowsill, a gift from my mother when I made COO. Growing steadily, she'd said, just like you. It had survived my neglect, somehow thriving despite minimal attention. Unlike my relationships, unlike my fertility, unlike apparently my career. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Natalie, my executive assistant for the past 6 years, stood awkwardly in the doorway. Her eyes were red-rimmed. They've already asked me to work for him, she said, her voice breaking. I told them I needed to think about it. Take the job, Nat, I said, surprising myself with my steadiness. You've got your mom's medical bills, I understand. She nodded, tears spilling. They're saying you mishandled the Westlake acquisition. That costs are out of control. That's why. She couldn't finish. The lies were starting already, rewriting history to justify their betrayal. We both know that's bullshit, I said quietly. Westlake is the most successful acquisition in company history. I know. Everyone knows. She hesitated. He wants your files, your contacts, everything. Of course he did. Ethan couldn't do my job without my roadmap. Tell him company policy requires a formal request through IT, I replied. Two could play the corporate procedure game. As Natalie left, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, not wanting to hear fake condolences from colleagues too cowardly to visit in person. But something made me pick up. Maggie Lanier, I answered, my professional mask still instinctively in place. Maggie, it's Josephine Vega. My breath caught. Josephine Vega, CEO of Helios Medical Networks, Meridian's fiercest competitor. The woman Warren Blackwood referred to as that barracuda in a pantsuit, the woman whose innovation had been eating into Meridian's market share for the past 2 years. Josephine, I said carefully, this is unexpected. I'll be direct, she said, her voice crisp yet somehow warm. I heard what happened. News travels fast. I want to meet with you. Today. My mind raced. Accepting a meeting with Meridian's biggest competitor on the day of my firing would violate at least 3 clauses in my employment contract. But then again, I was no longer employed. Why? I asked simply. Because Meridian just made the stupidest decision in their corporate history, and I'd like to be the one who benefits from it. She paused. The Langham. 4 o'clock. The tea lounge. Come alone, and we'll discuss how to turn this setback into the best thing that ever happened to you. The line went dead before I could respond. I sat down heavily in my chair, still my chair for the next hour or so, clutching my phone. Meridian had thrown me away after 15 years of sacrifice and dedication. 15 years of missed family events, failed relationships, postponed dreams, all for a company that discarded me for a man whose greatest qualification was marrying the boss's daughter. I looked at the box of my belongings, pathetically small for a life's work, then at the jade plant, still thriving despite everything. My phone buzzed with a text from security. Ida 20 minutes for escort. They couldn't even give me the dignity of walking out on my own. As the initial shock began to fade, something else bubbled up from deep inside. Not just anger, not just hurt, something darker, more primal. They thought they could push me aside, erase my contributions, and I'd just disappear. Warren had always underestimated me. It was his greatest weakness. He saw me as the reliable workhorse, the loyal lieutenant who would take the abuse and ask for more. He'd never seen the steel beneath. Never understood that my accommodating nature was a choice, not a character flaw. I picked up my phone again and created a new contact entry for Josephine Vega. Then I carefully tucked the separation package into my bag without opening it. Whatever they were offering, it wouldn't be enough for what they'd taken from me. Security arrived. 2 men I'd approved the hiring of last year. They looked apologetic but firm. We're just doing our job, Miss Lanier, the older one said softly. I know, Paul, I replied, picking up my small box and straightening my spine. Everyone's just doing their job. As we walked through the main workspace, conversations stopped. Keyboards fell silent. Eyes followed my final journey, some sympathetic, most cautious. a few nakedly ambitious as they calculated how my fall might create their opportunity to rise. Near the elevator, I saw Ethan standing with two board members, already holding court. His custom suit couldn't hide his fundamental mediocrity. He nodded at me with practiced solemnity, the expression of a man playing a role he hadn't earned. I could have walked past, should have walked past with dignity. Instead, I stopped. "Congratulations, Ethan," I said, my voice carrying just enough to draw attention. "Quick question before I go. Do you remember what HIPAA stands for?" His face flushed. The board members looked confused. "I'm sure Ethan knows all about compliance regulations," one offered quickly. "Of course," I smiled thinly. "I just thought since it's the foundational law governing everything our company does, he might want to share with everyone. For clarity." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Health insurance portability and—" He trailed off, the last words escaping him. "An Accountability Act," I finished. 1996. I helped write our first compliance protocols. They're in the blue binder on the left shelf in your new office. You might want to read it before your call with Boston General tomorrow. They're sticklers. Without waiting for a response, I turned and continued to the elevator. A small victory, but it felt good to remind everyone what they were losing, what he could never replace. Outside, the spring air hit me like reality itself. 15 years entering this building, and now I was barred from it. My keycard already deactivated, my email already suspended. 15 years erased in 15 minutes. I sat in my car, a sensible Audi I'd purchased to project the right image of success without ostentation, and finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. Tears came, hot and unstoppable. I cried for my lost identity, for the sacrifices that now seemed pointless, for the future I'd thought was secure. But as the tears subsided, that darker feeling returned, the voice inside that whispered, "They think this is the end of your story. Show them. It's just the beginning." I checked my appearance in the rearview mirror, reapplied my lipstick, and started the car. I had a meeting at 4 o'clock that might change everything. The Langham Hotel stood as an elegant rebuke to Meridian's glass and steel modernity, old money versus new technology. I felt strangely at home among its polished wood and discreet service, perhaps because both the hotel and I had witnessed the rise of empires while maintaining our dignity. In the tea lounge, Josephine Vega sat alone at a corner table. At 55, she exuded the confidence of a woman who had never apologized for her ambition. Her silver-streaked black hair was cut in a sharp bob that framed intelligent eyes. She stood as I approached. "Maggie," she extended her hand. "Thank you for coming." Her handshake was firm but not aggressive, confident but not dominating. Everything about her communicated a woman comfortable with her power. "I was curious," I replied, taking a seat. "And frankly, I didn't have anything better to do today." She smiled at my honesty. "Let's order first. Then we'll talk about how Meridian just handed me the competitive advantage I've been seeking for years." We ordered Earl Grey for her, espresso for me. I needed the sharpness. "I've followed your career," she said once the server left. 15 years building Meridian's operational infrastructure, their hospital network, their compliance systems, their client relationships. She leaned forward slightly. "You are Meridian, Maggie. Not Warren, not that board of golfing partners. You." Her words touched a wound still raw and bleeding. "Apparently not," I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "Apparently I'm replaceable by someone whose main qualification is marrying the boss's daughter." "Warren always was a fool," Josephine said with casual disdain. "But his loss is my opportunity. I want you at Helios, Maggie. Not just as an executive, as a partner." I blinked. "Partner?" "Equity. Board seat. Freedom to build without Warren's ego constraining you." She sipped her tea. "I've been watching you solve problems at Meridian that we're still struggling with at Helios. Imagine what you could do without Warren, second-guessing every innovation." The offer was stunning in its boldness, but I'd spent 15 years developing a healthy skepticism. "Why would you trust me with so much? I've been the competition. For all you know, I could be Warren's spy." Josephine laughed. a genuine sound that attracted glances from nearby tables. Warren doesn't have the imagination for that kind of play. Besides, her eyes narrowed slightly. I recognize something in you that I understand intimately. The look of a woman who's been underestimated her entire career, who's worked twice as hard to get half the credit, who's had men take her ideas in meetings and receive the applause. She set down her teacup precisely, and I recognized the look of someone who's finally reached her breaking point. Her words hit me like a revelation. She was right. I had reached my breaking point. 15 years of suppressing my anger, of smiling through mansplaining, of watching my ideas become someone else's achievement. It had calcified inside me, hardening into something dangerous. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked, leaning forward. Josephine's eyes gleamed. "Meridian's been winning the Mayo Clinic contract renewal for 6 years running. It's up again in 3 months, worth $47 million annually now." I nodded. I'd personally led the last 2 renewal negotiations. "I want it," she said simply. "And you know exactly how to get it." The Mayo contract. Meridian's crown jewel. I'd built the relationship from scratch, nursing it through implementation problems, system outages, and budget challenges. I knew every stakeholder by name, knew whose kids played which sports, knew who needed technical details and who just wanted bottom lines. "My non-compete," I started, "is aggressive but ultimately limited," Josephine finished. "I've had our legal team review the standard Meridian executive contract. They can restrict you from working with us directly for 12 months. They can prevent you from soliciting their employees, but they cannot prevent you from consulting for their clients." The loophole was elegant. Consulting for Mayo wouldn't violate my non-compete if I was careful. And if Mayo happened to switch vendors after receiving my consultant insights, still, something felt off. Why partner status? That's a big offer for someone you barely know. Josephine set down her teacup. "Because half of something extraordinary is better than all of something mediocre. Because I've built Helios by recognizing talent others have discarded. And because," her voice hardened, "I've waited 5 years to see Warren Blackwood's face when he loses Mayo. When he realizes his mistake wasn't just losing you, it was creating an enemy who knows all his weaknesses." Her vendetta against Warren clearly ran deep. I made a mental note to uncover that history later. For now, revenge aligned our interests perfectly. "I'd need guaranteed autonomy," I said, already mentally drafting requirements. "My own team. No interference in how I build relationships." "Done. And a 2-year protection clause if the partnership doesn't work out." "Reasonable." I took a deep breath. "Why did they really fire me, Josephine? You have ears everywhere. What's the real story?" She considered me for a moment, weighing how much to reveal. "The Lindale acquisition," she said finally. "Warren's planning to announce it next month. $2.7 billion deal, largest in company history. But their security protocols are a disaster. Potential HIPAA violations everywhere. You would have spotted it instantly, demanded they fix it before closing." The Lindale Group. Of course. The rising star in prescription management systems. Flashy user interface masking fundamental security flaws. I'd warned Warren against pursuing them 6 months ago. "Ethan won't see the compliance issues," I realized aloud. "He'll focus on the surface numbers." Josephine nodded. "Warren needed you gone before due diligence. You were the only executive who couldn't be bullied or charmed into overlooking the problems." The betrayal cut deeper, knowing they'd removed me not despite my competence, but because of it. I wasn't just inconvenient for a nepotistic appointment. I was dangerous to their reckless ambitions. "I need to think," I said finally. "This isn't just a job decision, it's a complete reinvention," she finished. "I understand. Take 48 hours. Then call me." She slid a business card across the table. "But remember, your market value is highest right now, while your knowledge is fresh. And your chance for," she paused deliberately, "correction of injustice is strongest before they've secured the relationships you built." Correction of injustice. Such a civilized phrase for what I was contemplating. As I left the Langham, the spring evening felt electric with possibility. My phone buzzed with concerned messages from former colleagues, the brave ones, reaching out despite the risk. I ignored them all, driving aimlessly through Cambridge as my mind raced through scenarios. I ended up at Montrose Point, a small overlook where I'd sometimes eat lunch when the office walls closed in. The Charles River flowed below, constant and unhurried. Across the water stood the Meridian building, its upper floors still lit as the workday continued without me. My phone rang again. This time, a name I hadn't expected. Dr. Eileen Sawyer, Chief Medical Officer at Mayo Clinic. Maggie, her familiar voice sounded concerned. I just heard. Are you okay? Eileen and I had developed more than a client relationship over years of collaboration. We'd shared late nights troubleshooting system integrations, traded book recommendations, celebrated when her daughter got into medical school. Still processing, I admitted. How did you hear? Warren called personally to assure me nothing would change with our service. Her tone made it clear what she thought of that conversation. Said his son-in-law would be taking over the relationship personally. And I told him we'd need to evaluate our options before committing to renewal. The steel in her voice was unmistakable. Maggie, we chose Meridian because of you. Your understanding of our needs. Your transparency when things go wrong. Your solutions, not excuses, approach. My heart swelled with vindication. That means a lot, Eileen. It's more than sentiment. The renewal process starts in 3 months, but we're beginning the vendor evaluation now. We'd value your insights, given your unique perspective. It was as direct an invitation as she could ethically extend. I may be available for independent consulting soon, I said carefully, once I sort through my transition. Excellent. My assistant will reach out next week. She paused. For what it's worth, Maggie, their loss is someone else's gain. Remember that. After we hung up, I sat watching the Meridian building as darkness fell and office lights winked out one by one. 15 years of my life in that glass tower. 15 years of achievement they thought they could erase. I thought of Warren's smug expression, of Ethan's unearned confidence, of the board members who couldn't meet my eyes, of everything I'd sacrificed for a company that discarded me like yesterday's coffee grounds. I made my decision. The next morning, I signed Josephine's partnership agreement. By afternoon, I had office space in Helios's Cambridge location, deliberately chosen to be visible from Warren's corner office across the river. By evening, I drafted a consultant proposal for Mayo Clinic that carefully navigated the boundaries of my non-compete. 3 days after being fired, I received a text from Natalie, my former assistant. Ethan, can't find the Westlake integration documentation. Board meeting disaster. Warren furious. I smiled. The Westlake documentation wasn't missing, it was exactly where it should be. Filed under acquisition notes /Westlake/final on the shared drive. But without my institutional knowledge, without my mental map of 15 years of systems and processes, finding anything at Meridian would be like navigating a labyrinth blindfolded. I hadn't sabotaged anything. I'd simply, Atlas stopped being their Atlas. 1 week later, I launched my consulting practice, carefully structured with help from Josephine's legal team. My first client, Mayo Clinic. My specific project, evaluating healthcare management systems for their upcoming contract renewal. 2 weeks in, I received another text from Natalie. They lost the Harborview Hospital account today. CFO is panicking. Harborview had been wavering for months. I'd been the one reassuring their procurement team, massaging their concerns, keeping them in the fold. Without me, the relationship had withered instantly. I wasn't directly poaching Meridian's clients. I didn't have to. The relationships had always been personal, built on trust in me, not the company logo. Without my stewardship, the accounts were naturally drifting away, seeking the same level of care they'd grown accustomed to. Meanwhile, I was building something unprecedented at Helios. Josephine had been true to her word, complete autonomy, resources at my disposal, no second guessing. I recruited 3 key analysts who'd been undervalued at Meridian, carefully timing their hiring to avoid non-solicitation violations. Together, we created a client management approach that married Meridian's best practices with innovations I'd proposed for years that Warren had deemed unnecessary. The results were immediate and dramatic. By month 2, we'd secured 2 mid-size hospital systems that had been on Meridian's prospect list for years, not by attacking Meridian, but by offering something better. Something I'd always wanted to build but had been constrained from creating. The Mayo evaluation process was proceeding exactly as planned. Each meeting revealed concerns about Meridian's future direction. Each analysis highlighted the risks of their new management approach. Each comparison showed Helios's innovative solutions addressing problems Mayo didn't even realize they had. Then came the moment that crystallized everything. I was working late at my new office, the lights of Meridian visible across the river, when my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. "Maggie Lanier," I answered. "Maggie, it's Warren." My blood went cold, then hot with anger. The audacity of this man to call me after what he'd done. "Warren," I kept my voice neutral. "This is unexpected. I think we got off on the wrong foot with your transition," he said, his voice carrying that forced, jovial tone he used when trying to manipulate someone. "The board has been reassessing the situation. We may have been hasty." "Hasty," I repeated flatly. "After 15 years. He cleared his throat. "The point is, there might be an opportunity to bring you back in a senior advisory capacity. The team misses your institutional knowledge." Translation: they were drowning without me. The realization brought a savage joy I didn't bother to suppress. "That's a generous offer," I said, watching Meridian's building across the water. "Unfortunately, I'm committed to other projects now." "We can be very competitive with compensation," he pressed. "Whatever you're getting, we'll beat it." I thought about the partnership agreement with Helios, the equity, the board seat, the autonomy, none of which Warren would ever truly offer. "It's not about money, Warren. It never was." "Then what do you want?" Frustration edged into his voice. "Name it." What did I want? Revenge had seemed so simple at first. Make them suffer. Make them regret discarding me. But now, building something new at Helios, I realized revenge wasn't enough. I wanted vindication. I wanted them to understand exactly what they'd lost. "I want you to learn your lesson," I said quietly, "but I don't think you're capable of that." "Don't be childish, Maggie. This is business. Sometimes hard decisions." "Replacing me with your son-in-law wasn't a hard decision, Warren. It was an easy one. The coward's choice. And now you're facing the consequences." His tone hardened. "If this is about Mayo, this is about 15 years of my life I gave to building something meaningful. Something you were willing to risk for nepotism and short-term gain." I paused, letting the truth sink in. "You didn't value what you had, Warren. Someone else does. That's not vindictiveness. That's capitalism. Isn't that what you always preached?" After a long silence, he spoke with cold fury. "You won't get away with this. The non-compete has been meticulously honored, as your lawyers have surely confirmed. I'm not working for your competitors directly for 12 months. I'm consulting independently. I haven't solicited your employees. They've sought me out. Everything I'm doing is perfectly legal." I allowed myself a small smile. "I learned contract law from watching you manipulate it for years." "This isn't over," he threatened. "Actually, Warren, it was over the moment you decided I was disposable. You just didn't know it yet." I hung up, heart pounding but spirits soaring. His call confirmed everything. They were flailing without me. The Mayo account was slipping away. The Lindale acquisition was likely revealing the compliance nightmares I'd predicted. 3 days later, Natalie sent her most revealing text yet. "Lindale deal postponed indefinitely. Board emergency meeting called. Ethan being questioned about due diligence failures." The Lindale acquisition, Warren's legacy-defining deal, was collapsing under the weight of the compliance issues I would have caught immediately. Issues that Ethan, with his hedge fund background and 7 months' experience, had completely missed. That weekend, I received an email from Thomas, the CFO who couldn't meet my eyes the day they fired me. The subject line read simply, "You were right." The message contained a single attachment, board minutes showing that the emergency session, where they'd voted to replace me, had actually been planned 3 weeks in advance. Warren had lied about the timeline, about the reasons, about everything. Thomas had finally found his conscience, too late to help me, but just in time to witness the implosion. The Mayo Clinic decision came down exactly as I'd orchestrated. Their evaluation committee recommended switching to Helios's platform, citing innovation, security, and relationship management as key factors. The contract, now worth $52 million annually with the expanded services I'd suggested, would transfer when the current agreement expired in 3 weeks. Josephine was ecstatic. "This is just the beginning," she said during our celebration dinner. "With you leading client relationships, we'll take every major account within 2 years." I smiled, raising my glass. "To corrections of injustice." She clinked her glass against mine. "And to women who refuse to disappear when discarded." The next morning brought news I hadn't anticipated. Meridian's stock had plunged 22% on the announcement of the Mayo loss. Analysts were questioning the company's stability. And an anonymous source had leaked to TechCrunch that the Lindale acquisition had failed due to catastrophic compliance oversights that senior management ignored. I hadn't leaked it. Didn't need to. The truth has a way of surfacing when systems start to crack. By that afternoon, 3 more hospital networks had contacted me about evaluation consulting for their Meridian contracts. The avalanche had begun. Not because I was actively destroying Meridian, but because I'd stopped holding it together. That evening, as I worked late again in my Helios office, I received a final text from Natalie. Warren asked for resignation. Board unanimous. Ethan also out. They're talking about bringing in crisis management team. I walked to the window and looked across the river at the Meridian building. 15 years of my life in that tower. 15 years they thought could be erased with 7 cold words. Your services are no longer required. I hadn't set out to destroy Warren or Meridian. I'd simply taken my value elsewhere. Built something better. Let natural consequences unfold. The truly devastating revenge wasn't stealing their clients or exposing their mistakes. It was showing them, and myself, that I had always been the true source of their success. That without me, the weaknesses I'd been covering for years were finally exposed to daylight. Warren had believed Meridian was his creation, his legacy. Now he understood the truth. I hadn't worked for Meridian all those years. Meridian had worked because of me. My phone buzzed with an incoming email. The Mayo Clinic contract, finalized and ready for signatures. The first major victory of many to come. Not a victory built on destruction, but on creation. On finally being recognized for my true value. I signed the document, then glanced once more at the Meridian building across the river. Its lights seemed dimmer somehow, its presence less imposing. "Goodbye, Warren," I whispered to the window. "Your services are no longer required." Have you ever been underestimated? Overlooked despite your contributions? Replaced by someone less qualified but better connected? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. What would you have done in my position? Would you have taken Josephine's offer or tried something else entirely? And how do you recover when a company you helped build suddenly decides you're dispensable? If this story resonated with you, please subscribe for more raw, honest accounts of professional betrayal and sweet, well-earned justice. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't about destroying what hurt you. It's about building something better from the ashes of what you lost. "I think we're all in agreement," Dexter announced to the gathered management team, who stared at me with cold hostility. Someone who started answering phones simply isn't qualified to lead this company, regardless of what the board thinks. My throat tightened as I looked at the faces of colleagues I'd worked alongside for years. Not one would meet my eyes. After 15 years of dedication, rising from reception to CEO through sheer determination, it had taken him just one day to turn everyone against me. 24 hours earlier, he'd cornered me after the promotion announcement. "You need to publicly thank me for making you who you are," he'd insisted. "Tell everyone I trained you, that I'm the reason you're here." I'd refused. "My success isn't because of you, it's despite you." His eyes had narrowed. "You'll regret this." Now, facing this ambush meeting, I realized how thoroughly he'd planned my downfall. "I'm calling an emergency board meeting," I announced. "Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Dexter laughed. "Good luck with that. I've already spoken to most of them." Walking back to my office, panic set in. I'd overcome countless obstacles, growing up in foster care, working multiple jobs to put myself through college, enduring years of his subtle sabotage, but this coordinated attack might be too much. I hadn't wanted this job for the title. I wanted it because I had plans, real improvements for our workforce, innovations our industry needed. He'd always dismissed my ideas as cute and impractical. Now he was determined to erase me completely. That night, instead of preparing elaborate defenses, I made an unexpected decision. I visited our production facilities. The night shift workers were surprised to see the new CEO arriving at 2 a.m., even more shocked when I asked about their daily challenges. I repeated this at 3 more locations before dawn. By morning, I'd spoken with over 100 employees, people whose names Dexter had never bothered to learn in his 20 years with the company. I arrived at the board meeting, exhausted but resolute. He walked in last, his confident stride faltering when he saw what awaited him. I watched his expression change from smug certainty to confusion, then alarm. His eyes darted around the room, taking in not just the board members, but the faces he'd never bothered to acknowledge. His hand gripped the doorframe, knuckles whitening. "What is this?" he whispered. "If you're enjoying this story of workplace revenge and corporate justice, please like this video and subscribe to hear more tales of triumph over toxic leadership. I promise the way this unfolds will be worth your time. Let me know in the comments if you've ever witnessed someone get exactly what they deserved in a professional setting. My name is Astrid. Before I was CEO, before I was even management, I was just the woman who answered phones with a business degree and big dreams, the woman who stayed late to learn every aspect of the company, the woman whose ideas were stolen by Dexter for 8 consecutive years. I grew up bouncing between foster homes in rural Michigan, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home. My belongings fit in a single duffel bag until I was 17. College was a pipe dream until my final foster mother, a community college administrative assistant, helped me secure scholarships and grants. I graduated with honors, sending out 200 applications before landing the receptionist position. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a foot in the door. I answered phones with the same intensity other people reserved for solving complex equations, learning caller patterns, memorizing extension numbers, understanding the company's operations through its communication flow. After 6 months, I submitted a detailed analysis of our call patterns with suggestions for improved efficiency. My immediate supervisor was impressed enough to show it to her manager, who shared it with his director. That's when Dexter first noticed me. He called me to his office, praised my initiative, and promptly implemented my changes without acknowledging their source. When quarterly metrics showed a 16% improvement in customer response time, he accepted congratulations from the executive team with a practiced modesty that made my skin crawl. "Just doing my job," he'd said, catching my eye across the break room. Spotting talent and developing it, that established our pattern for the next decade and a half. I would work twice as hard as anyone else, generate ideas that solved persistent problems. And Dexter would position himself as the visionary who'd guided the development of those solutions. When I was promoted to customer service representative, then team lead, then manager, each step came with Dexter's mentorship, which consisted mainly of him taking credit for my work, while explaining to me how I should be grateful for the opportunities he provided. "You know, Astrid," he once told me after I'd spent a weekend rebuilding our customer tracking system, "most people in your position wouldn't get these chances. Starting where you did, you should be thankful I see something worth developing." I learned to document everything meticulously. Every idea, every implementation plan, every result, all stored where he couldn't access them. I wasn't sure what I was saving them for, but something told me the record would matter someday. As I moved up through middle management, I started building real relationships with employees at all levels, not the superficial leadership visibility Dexter practiced at company picnics, but genuine connections built on mutual respect. I learned about production bottlenecks from assembly workers, shipping challenges from logistics personnel, and customer pain points from service representatives. When I presented improvement strategies in management meetings, Dexter would inevitably find ways to dismiss them, only to resurrect altered versions weeks later as his own insights. "Astrid has an admirable enthusiasm," he'd say when I objected. but lacks the big picture understanding needed at the executive level. Despite his efforts to contain my influence, the results I generated caught the attention of our board chairperson, Geneva. A straight-talking former operations executive, she began inviting me to present at quarterly board reviews. "The numbers from your division are consistently outperforming projections," she noted during one session. "What's your secret?" "No secret," I replied. "I listen to the people doing the work." Dexter interrupted smoothly. "What Astrid means is that she implements the strategic framework I've established for management-employee communication." Geneva's gaze had shifted between us, her expression unreadable. 2 months later, our CEO announced his retirement. The board began a search for his replacement, considering both internal and external candidates. Dexter, as Chief Operating Officer, was widely considered the heir apparent. He'd been positioning himself for years, cultivating relationships with board members and industry influencers. I applied as well, not expecting serious consideration but wanting my vision for the company on record. The interview process was grueling, 5 rounds over 6 weeks, culminating in presentations to the full board. Dexter's presentation was polished, focused on market expansion and acquisition opportunities. Mine centered on operational excellence and employee empowerment as foundations for sustainable growth. The day the board announced their decision remains etched in my memory. The executive team gathered in the conference room, tension thick enough to touch. Geneva entered, her expression neutral. "After careful consideration," she began, "the board has selected our new chief executive officer." Dexter straightened his tie, his expression already victorious. "Astrid Morgan will assume the role, effective immediately." The silence was absolute. I felt a curious lightness, as if gravity had momentarily suspended. Then Dexter laughed, a short, incredulous sound that died when he realized no one was joining him. "This must be a mistake," he said, looking directly at Geneva. "The board was unanimous," she replied. "Astrid's vision for the company aligns with our long-term objectives." The congratulations from others were stiff, perfunctory. Dexter said nothing, simply watching me with an expression that made me instinctively check my office for security vulnerabilities later that day. He cornered me that afternoon, demanding I credit him publicly for my success. When I refused, I saw something shift in his eyes, calculation replacing anger. That should have warned me. The next day came the ambush meeting with the management team, their sudden unified front against me. Decades of relationship building seemed to evaporate overnight, as Dexter activated his network of allegiances, favors, and shared secrets. Now, as I stood facing what remained of my career after just 2 days as CEO, I felt a strange calm replace my initial panic. This wasn't just about my job anymore. This was about every person in the company whose voice had been ignored by Dexter's leadership style. My late-night visits to our facilities had revealed systemic issues he'd buried for years. Safety protocols ignored to hit production targets. Harassment complaints dismissed to protect high-performing managers. Quality concerns overridden to maintain delivery schedules. The emergency board meeting I'd called wasn't just my defense. It was an intervention for a company culture that had been slowly poisoned. As Dexter stood frozen in the doorway of the boardroom, taking in the unexpected assembly of employees from every level of the company, I watched realization dawn on his face. This wasn't going to follow his script. "What exactly is happening here?" he demanded, his voice lower now, controlled but with an edge of uncertainty. I met his gaze steadily. "We're having an honest conversation about the state of this company, something long overdue." His eyes narrowed as he scanned the faces around the table. Maintenance workers, production supervisors, HR specialists, people whose concerns he'd dismissed for years. "These people don't belong in a board meeting," he said, looking to the board members for support. "This is highly irregular and completely unprofessional." Geneva folded her hands on the table. "I approved this format, Dexter. Please take a seat." He remained standing. "May I ask why my 20 years of executive experience is being undermined by a room full of staff?" A muscle technician named Pax stood up. "That's exactly the problem, sir. You've never seen us as anything but staff, not as people with valuable insights about the work we do every day. I've created the most profitable division in company history. Dexter snapped. I don't need Dext. You've created the division with the highest reported profit, interrupted Wren from accounting. But we've been tracking the hidden costs of your methods. She slid a folder toward the center of the table. The turnover rates in your division are triple the industry average. The workers' compensation claims from safety violations have been classified under different expense categories to hide the pattern. Dexter's face paled slightly. These are complex operational matters that entry-level employees don't have the context to understand. I watched him struggling to regain control of the narrative, to reposition himself as the experienced voice of reason against emotional subordinates. It was a technique I'd seen him employ countless times. Perhaps, I suggested quietly, we should let them speak, and you can provide that context afterward. For the next 2 hours, employees detailed specific instances where Dexter had overridden safety concerns, buried harassment complaints, and taken credit for innovations developed by his team. Each speaker was calm, factual, and devastatingly specific. Dexter's rebuttals grew increasingly defensive. When a shipping coordinator described being denied essential equipment despite multiple accident reports, Dexter claimed budget constraints beyond his control. When a product designer revealed how her patented innovation had been presented as Dexter's brainchild to the executive team, he dismissed it as a misunderstanding about collaborative work. His eyes kept returning to mine, his expression shifting from anger to disbelief to something approaching fear. This is a coordinated character assassination, he finally declared. Astrid has clearly orchestrated this to solidify her position. I invited these employees to speak, I acknowledged. But every word they've said has been their own. You've had 15 years to listen to them, Dexter. You chose not to. The board members exchanged glances. Geneva cleared her throat. I think we've heard enough to understand there are serious leadership issues that predate Astrid's appointment. The question now is how we move forward. Dexter straightened, smoothing his expression into something more controlled. I admit I may have been overly focused on results rather than process. If the board wishes, I can implement a more inclusive management approach going forward. That won't be necessary, Geneva replied. The board reaffirms its decision to appoint Astrid as CEO. Furthermore, we believe a reorganization of the executive structure is warranted. Dexter's smile froze. What exactly does that mean? Geneva looked him directly in the eyes. It means we'll be conducting a comprehensive review of your division's operations, reporting structures, and personnel decisions over the past 5 years. You can't possibly, he began, then stopped himself. That seems excessive for what amounts to differences in management style. This goes beyond management style, said one of the board members, a retired judge named Imran. What we've heard today suggests potential liability issues that the company must address. Dexter looked around the room, searching for allies among the executives and finding none. The united front he'd cultivated against me had evaporated in the face of overwhelming testimony. I've given 20 years to this company, he said, his voice tight. My record speaks for itself. Yes, I agreed softly. It does. He turned to me then, and in his eyes I saw a calculation taking place, measuring what he knew against what might have been discovered, assessing how much damage control was possible. Perhaps, he said carefully, we should continue this discussion privately, Astrid. I believe there's room for a mutually beneficial resolution. What did you have in mind? I asked, maintaining a neutral expression. He glanced at the others. Something that preserves the stability of the company while acknowledging everyone's contributions appropriately. I understood what he was suggesting, a negotiated peace that would allow him to save face and possibly retain his position. For a moment, I considered it, the path of least resistance, the political solution. Then I remembered the night shift workers describing how their equipment maintenance requests had been repeatedly denied, the junior designer who'd been transferred to an isolated branch office after rejecting Dexter's advances, the safety officer who'd been dismissed for creating unnecessary concerns when he reported violations. I looked at Dexter, really looked at him, and saw not the intimidating figure who had dominated my professional life for 15 years, but simply a man who had built his career on taking credit for other people's work and silencing those who questioned him. I think, I said carefully, that everything should be on the record. Complete transparency is the only way forward. His expression hardened as he realized I wasn't going to offer him an escape route. "You'll regret this," he said quietly, the same words he'd used the day before. But this time, they sounded hollow. What happened next would change everything, not just for Dexter and me, but for the entire company. Geneva folded the folder shut and addressed the room. "This meeting will reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. The board will deliberate on next steps. In the meantime, Dexter, you are placed on administrative leave pending our investigation." The blood drained from his face. Administrative leave? Based on unsubstantiated claims from disgruntled employees? Imran, the former judge, leaned forward. "We have sufficient cause for concern. Your access to company systems will be temporarily restricted until we complete our review." Dexter's gaze darted around the room, landing on each executive's face. The same people who'd stood with him against me yesterday now avoided eye contact. He was watching his carefully constructed alliance crumble in real time. "You're making a critical mistake," he said, voice tight with restraint. "The operational disruption alone will be managed." I finished. "The company survived before you. It will survive during this investigation." He turned to me then, his expression no longer guarded. Raw fury flashed in his eyes, a glimpse of something ugly I'd always sensed beneath his polished exterior. "You engineered this," he hissed, low enough that only I could hear. "You won't last a month without me." Security arrived to escort him from the building. I watched through the window as he stood in the parking lot, staring back at the headquarters with such intensity I could feel it through the glass. He made a call, spoke briefly, then drove away with a screech of tires. I turned back to find Geneva watching me. "That was exceptionally well handled, Astrid. But you've made a powerful enemy." "He was always my enemy," I replied. "The difference is that now it's in the open." The following weeks were chaotic. Dexter's absence revealed the extent to which he'd centralized control. Critical information was fragmented across protected files. Decision-making processes existed only in his head. Key vendor relationships turned out to be personal rather than institutional. "He designed it this way," noted Tay, our technical operations lead. "The company literally couldn't function without him, or so he thought." I established cross-functional teams to reconstruct processes, implement proper documentation, and create transparent workflows. The initial inefficiency was painful, but gradually a more resilient organization emerged. 3 weeks after the boardroom confrontation, I received the first message. "Enjoying my office? Don't get too comfortable." It came from an anonymous number. I showed it to our head of security, who increased surveillance around the building and arranged for monitoring of my home. The board's investigation proceeded methodically. HR interviews, financial audits, technical reviews of data access patterns. The picture that emerged was more troubling than even I had suspected. Ren from accounting appeared at my office door one afternoon, her expression grim. "We found something you should see." She placed a flash drive on my desk. "These are historical budget allocations for the manufacturing division. The official records versus the actual expenditures." The discrepancies were substantial. Funds allocated for equipment upgrades, safety improvements, and training programs had been diverted elsewhere. On paper, these investments had been made. In reality, the money had disappeared. "Where did it go?" I asked. "We're still tracing that," Ren replied, "but we've identified several shell companies that received consulting fees, companies with no employees, no offices, and no deliverables." The investigation expanded to include external auditors and, eventually, regulatory compliance officers. What had begun as an internal power struggle was evolving into something far more serious. Through it all, I focused on rebuilding the company, daily operations, employee morale, customer relationships. The work kept me centered as the storm gathered around Dexter's misconduct. The anonymous messages continued. "They'll blame you too when the stock drops. Ask Geneva about her vacation last year. Who do you think arranged it? The board will turn on you next. They always need a scapegoat." Each message was designed to seed doubt, to isolate me, to make me question my allies. I shared them all with our security team and the board, refusing to let them fester in secret. 6 weeks after Dexter's departure, Geneva called me to her office. She looked tired, the investigation taking its toll on her as well. "The preliminary findings are complete," she said, sliding a thick report across her desk. "It's worse than we thought." The document detailed a systematic pattern of financial mismanagement, ethical violations, and possible criminal conduct spanning most of Dexter's tenure. Embezzlement disguised as consulting fees, harassment settlements buried in accounting codes, safety violations concealed from regulators. "The board will meet tomorrow to review these findings," Geneva continued. "We'll likely need to self-report to regulatory authorities." I nodded, the weight of the situation settling over me. What happens to the company? That depends partly on how proactively we address this, and how effectively you lead through the crisis. That night, I received another message. "Tomorrow will be interesting. Hope you've updated your resume." I barely slept, reviewing contingency plans for various scenarios. When my alarm sounded at 5 a.m., I'd been awake for hours already. The board meeting was scheduled for 8 a.m. I arrived at 7, wanting time to prepare. The parking garage was nearly empty, my footsteps echoing in the concrete space. As I approached my car after retrieving a forgotten file, a figure stepped from behind a support column. Dexter. He looked different, unshaven, eyes bloodshot, his normally immaculate appearance noticeably diminished. The confident executive had been replaced by something more volatile. "We need to talk," he said, blocking my path to the elevator. I stepped back, creating distance between us. "Any communication should go through the legal team," he laughed bitterly. "Always so proper, Astrid. So by the book. That's why you were easy to control for so long." "I'm late for a meeting," I replied, reaching for my phone. "The board's going to throw me to the wolves," he said. "You know that, right? They'll sacrifice me to protect themselves and the company. Your actions have consequences, Dexter." His expression hardened. "I built this company. Everything valuable about it came from my vision, my connections, my work. Is that what you tell yourself?" "It's the truth," he insisted, stepping closer. "And now they'll erase me, make me the villain, while they keep benefiting from everything I created." "You had choices," I said. "Every step of the way, you chose personal gain over ethical leadership." Something shifted in his eyes. A dangerous calculation. "You think you're so different? So pure? I know things about this company that would implicate everyone in the C-suite, including your precious Geneva." "Then share that with the investigators," I replied, moving toward the stairwell door since he still blocked the elevator. "There's still a way out," he said, his voice suddenly calmer. "For both of us." I paused, hand on the door. "What are you suggesting?" "A united front. You and me. Presenting a narrative of misunderstandings and procedural oversights. No malice, no criminal intent. Just administrative failures that we're committed to rectifying. You want me to help you cover up fraud?" "I want you to be smart," he snapped. "This investigation will damage the company, maybe fatally. Thousands of jobs lost. Your grand vision for employee empowerment dead before it starts." For a moment, I considered how easy it would be. To compromise. To find middle ground. To avoid the pain of a public scandal. "What exactly would this arrangement involve?" I asked, watching his reaction carefully. Hope flickered across his face. He thought I was yielding. "Simple. You tell the board you've reviewed the findings and believe there's been a misinterpretation of normal business practices. You recommend an internal correction rather than external disclosure. In exchange, I resign quietly, with standard severance and non-disparagement agreements. And the employees whose safety was compromised? The women who were harassed? The shareholders who were defrauded?" He waved dismissively. "Compensation packages, non-disclosure agreements, standard practice for mitigating corporate liability. All neat and tidy," I said. "All swept away." "Exactly." He smiled, thinking he'd won. "Business continues. Jobs protected. Your leadership unquestioned." I studied him, seeing clearly for the first time how his mind worked, how utterly transactional his view of the world was, how completely he believed everyone could be bought or manipulated at the right price. "No," I said simply. His smile vanished. "Excuse me? The answer is no. I won't help you escape accountability. His expression contorted. You self-righteous bitch. You think this is about justice? This is about your vendetta against me. This is about doing what's right for the company and the people who work there. You'll regret this, he said, the threat in his voice unmistakable. When this company collapses and everyone blames the CEO who could have prevented it, you'll wish you'd listened to me. Security arrived then, alerted by the silent alarm I'd triggered on my phone. They escorted him from the property, adding trespassing to his growing list of offenses. Shaken, I made my way to the boardroom. The encounter had rattled me more than I wanted to admit. Not because of Dexter's threats, but because for a fleeting moment, I'd actually considered his offer. The board meeting proceeded as scheduled. The investigation findings were presented in excruciating detail. The directors asked thoughtful, often painful questions: financial implications, legal exposure, remediation options. We need to decide how to proceed, Geneva said finally. Our choices, broadly speaking, are to self-report to authorities or to handle this internally. The room fell silent. Self-reporting meant potential criminal charges, massive financial penalties, and devastating publicity. Internal resolution meant containing the damage, but also, in some sense, perpetuating the cover-up. All eyes turned to me. As CEO, I began carefully, my recommendation is based on what's best for the company's long-term health, not what's easiest or most comfortable in the short term. I detailed my plan: full disclosure to authorities, cooperation with any resulting investigation, transparent communication with employees and shareholders, and comprehensive remediation for those harmed. This will be painful, I acknowledged. Our stock will suffer. Our reputation will be damaged. We may face significant financial penalties, but the alternative, continuing to hide these violations, will ultimately be more destructive. The debate was intense. Several directors argued passionately for internal resolution. Others supported full disclosure. The division mirrored wider ethical questions in business. IMT. When does protection become complicity? In the end, my recommendation prevailed by a narrow margin. We would self-report and face the consequences openly. As the meeting concluded, Geneva pulled me aside. That couldn't have been easy, especially after your encounter with Dexter this morning. I looked at her, surprised. The security team told you? Of course. I'm still board chair. She studied me. Were you tempted by his offer? Briefly, I admitted. The easy path is always tempting. She nodded. That's why we chose you, Astrid. Not because you never feel the temptation, but because you recognize it and choose differently. The following days were a blur of activity: legal briefings, press statements, employee communications. The stock dropped 22% when the news broke. Company name scandal trended on social media. Business journalists dissected our statement, speculating about criminal charges and leadership failures. Dexter was interviewed on a financial news program, presenting himself as a scapegoat for standard industry practices. This is what happens when you put inexperienced people in charge, he told the earnest anchor. They panic at normal business operations they don't understand. The narrative he crafted was compelling. The seasoned executive sacrificed by a nervous board and an insecure new CEO desperate to establish authority. Some media outlets adopted his framing. Industry commentators questioned whether the company had overreacted. For a moment, it seemed Dexter might actually emerge from the scandal with his reputation intact, possibly even enhanced as the voice of reason against corporate overcorrection. Then, something unexpected happened. Employees began speaking out, not just to investigators or journalists, but directly to the public through social media. Assembly line workers describing safety concerns ignored for years. Administrative assistants detailing hostile work environments. Engineers explaining how innovations were suppressed if they didn't originate with Dexter. Hundreds of individual stories coalesced into a powerful counter-narrative. Not carefully crafted corporate communications, but authentic voices describing lived experiences. Niev, a quality control specialist, created a video that went viral. I reported brake component failures for 8 months. Dexter's response was to transfer me to packaging. 3 months later, there was a recall after accidents were reported. He knew. He chose profit over safety. Hakeem, a former HR manager, published emails showing how harassment complaints against executives were systematically buried. I was told these incidents didn't meet the threshold for investigation. The actual threshold was whether the accused was in Dexter's protected circle. The public sentiment shifted. Regulatory investigators accelerated their inquiry. Former business partners began distancing themselves from Dexter. Through it all, I focused on rebuilding, new safety protocols, revised financial controls, enhanced reporting mechanisms for ethical concerns. The work was exhausting but essential. 3 months after the board meeting, federal authorities announced formal charges against Dexter: securities fraud, wire fraud, obstruction of justice. The company was cooperating fully, having self-reported the violations. The day of his arraignment, I received one final anonymous message. "Hope you're satisfied. You've destroyed everything." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The criminal proceedings would stretch on for more than a year. The company's recovery would take even longer. Both processes would unfold in the harsh spotlight of public scrutiny and regulatory oversight. But something unexpected emerged from the crisis: a stronger, more resilient organization. Employees who had been silenced found their voices. Processes that had been opaque became transparent. Values that had been merely slogans became actual practice. 6 months into the transformation, I finally cleared out Dexter's old office, which I'd been too busy to address until then. Behind his desk, I found a framed mission statement he'd commissioned, full of grand language about integrity and excellence. As I removed it from the wall, I noticed something tucked behind the frame: a small notebook. Inside were names, dates, and cryptic notations. It took me a moment to understand what I was seeing. It was Dexter's record of leverage, NEN, personal information about colleagues, board members, and business partners, drinking problems, marital infidelities, financial difficulties, health issues, notes on how each vulnerability could be exploited if necessary. The final page had a section labeled Astrid. Under my name was a single sentence: "No exploitable weaknesses identified. Presents as too perfect. Dig deeper." I closed the notebook, suddenly understanding something fundamental about Dexter that had eluded me for years. His worldview wasn't just transactional, it was fundamentally predatory. He viewed people exclusively as either threats to be neutralized or resources to be exploited. The revelation was oddly freeing. His opposition to me had never been about my performance or qualifications. It was about his inability to control me through the normal mechanisms of leverage he applied to others. That night, I stayed late reviewing production statistics. Our output had finally returned to pre-crisis levels. Quality metrics were actually improving. Employee turnover had decreased significantly. As I prepared to leave, Pax from maintenance appeared at my door. The same technician who had stood up to Dexter in the boardroom months earlier. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Of course. What can I help with?" He entered, seeming uncharacteristically hesitant. "Some of us were talking about everything that's happened, about what comes next. I'm listening." He handed me a folder. "This is a proposal from the production team. A new workflow design that we think could increase efficiency while reducing physical strain on workers." I opened the folder, scanning the detailed diagrams and implementation plan. "This is impressive work. We've been developing it for months," he explained. "But we were afraid to bring it forward until now." "Afraid?" He nodded. "Under the old leadership, suggesting changes often led to problems. The implications were clear. Innovation had been actively suppressed unless it originated from or could be credited to Dexter. This changes today," I said, standing to emphasize my point. "I want you to present this at next week's operations review. Full credit to your team." His expression shifted from hesitation to cautious optimism. "You're serious?" "Absolutely. This company's strength is its people, all of its people. The more voices contributing to our success, the stronger we become." After he left, I stood at the window overlooking the production facility. Lights blazed in the manufacturing area where the night shift was hard at work. In the distance, distribution trucks moved steadily through the loading bays. The company was healing, finding its way forward. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more challenges, more difficult decisions, more moments of doubt. But for the first time since taking the CEO position, I felt genuine hope, not just for survival, but for transformation. Something stronger and more ethical was emerging from the ashes of Dexter's regime. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Dexter's legal troubles were expanding. New charges filed. Additional co-conspirators named. His carefully constructed world continuing to unravel. I put the phone away, turning back to the work at hand. His story was no longer mine to worry about. I had a company to rebuild, employees to support, and a future to create. As I gathered my things to leave, Geneva texted, "Board meeting tomorrow. Be prepared for some resistance to the new compensation structure." I smiled, welcoming the challenge. This was what real leadership looked like. Not domination or control, but the constant work of building consensus around worthy goals. Outside, the night air was cool against my face. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few cars belonging to other late workers. I paused, taking in the sprawling facility that had been my professional home for 15 years. For so long, this place had been defined by Dexter's influence, his priorities, his methods, his vision. Now, it was becoming something else entirely, something better. My phone rang. It was Ren from accounting. "Sorry to call so late," she said, her voice tense. "But we found something in the international accounts. Something big. You need to see this right away," Ren continued. "Can you come back to the office?" 20 minutes later, we sat in the financial department's conference room. Spreadsheets and transaction records spread across the table. We were auditing the international subsidiaries, Ren explained, pointing to a series of highlighted entries. "There's a pattern of transactions between our Singapore office and these 3 entities in the Cayman Islands. The numbers were substantial, millions flowing through seemingly legitimate business channels, then fragmenting into smaller transactions before disappearing into private accounts." "How long has this been happening?" I asked. "At least 7 years, Ren replied. "It's sophisticated. The initial transfers appear completely legitimate. Consultant fees, vendor payments, partnership distributions. But when we traced where the money ultimately went," she slid a document toward me. It was a bank statement. The account holder's name made my heart skip. Dexter's wife, Kara. "There's more," Ren said quietly. "Much more." By midnight, the picture was clear. Beyond the financial mismanagement we'd already uncovered was something far more deliberate. A systematic embezzlement scheme that had diverted nearly $34 million to offshore accounts controlled by Dexter and his associates. "The federal investigators need to see this immediately," I said. Ren nodded. "There's one more thing you should know." She hesitated. "These transactions required dual authorization. Someone else in senior management was involved." My mind raced through possibilities. "Who?" "We're still connecting the dots, but the authorization codes point to." She swallowed. Vincent, our chief financial officer. One of the executives who had sided with Dexter against me in those early days, but who had since become one of my most vocal supporters in the recovery efforts. The betrayal stung, but it also explained something that had bothered me: how smoothly Vincent had pivoted from Dexter's ally to my apparent advocate, not from genuine conviction, but from self-preservation. "Let's keep this between us for now," I said. "Continue gathering evidence, but be discreet. I need time to consider next steps." That night, sleep eluded me. I paced my apartment, weighing options, considering consequences. By dawn, I had a plan, not just for addressing this new discovery, but for bringing the entire situation to its necessary conclusion. I arrived at the office earlier than usual, requested an urgent meeting with Geneva, and laid out what we'd found. "This changes everything," she said, her expression grim. "The federal investigation will expand significantly. More executives implicated, larger financial impact, greater public scrutiny. There's another dimension to consider," I added. "The timing." "What do you mean?" "Dexter's trial begins next week. This new evidence will substantially strengthen the prosecution's case." Geneva studied me. "You have something specific in mind." It wasn't a question. After months of working closely together through the crisis, she'd learned to read my measured tone. "I do. I confirmed. Something that serves justice while protecting the company's future. The next morning, Vincent requested a private meeting. His normally confident demeanor was replaced by barely concealed anxiety. "I've been reflecting on my role during Dexter's tenure," he began, not quite meeting my eyes. There were times I should have asked more questions, demanded more transparency. I watched him construct his narrative in real time, positioning himself as negligent rather than complicit. "What specifically prompted this reflection?" I asked. He shifted in his chair. "Professional responsibility, ethical consideration. The company's recovery has made me reconsider many aspects of our previous operations." "Interesting timing," I observed, just as we begin reviewing international financial structures. A flicker of alarm crossed his face, quickly suppressed. "Is there a specific concern with those accounts?" "Nothing we can't address through proper oversight," I replied, revealing nothing. "I appreciate your commitment to improvement, Vincent." After he left, I called our general counsel. "We need to accelerate the timeline. Vincent knows something's happening." The next week unfolded with precise, deliberate steps. Additional auditors were assigned to international accounts. Security protocols around financial systems were enhanced. Key documents were secured with chain of custody procedures. Through it all, I maintained a facade of routine operations, budget reviews, product development meetings, facility tours. The normal rhythm of corporate leadership continued uninterrupted. Dexter's trial began with the expected media circus. Financial journalists, legal analysts, industry observers, all gathered to witness the downfall of a once celebrated executive. I attended the opening day, sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom. Dexter entered wearing an expertly tailored suit, his attorney beside him, his expression confident despite the circumstances. He scanned the gallery, his gaze locking with mine for a brief moment before dismissing me with a slight smirk. He still believed he would prevail. That belief was written in every line of his posture. The prosecution's opening statement outlined a case focused on the financial violations we'd initially reported. Serious charges, but limited in scope compared to what we now knew. For 3 days, I watched the proceedings unfold exactly as Dexter anticipated. His defense team challenged evidence, questioned witness credibility, and constructed alternative explanations for the documented violations, technical discrepancies, procedural misunderstandings, delegated responsibilities. The narrative emerging was precisely what he had suggested in the parking garage months earlier: administrative failures rather than deliberate fraud. His attorney positioned him as perhaps negligent in oversight but not criminally culpable. Some jurors appeared receptive to this framing. The prosecution's case, while methodically presented, lacked the emotional impact needed to overcome the defense's technical objections. On the 4th day, I received a text from the lead federal prosecutor. "It's time." I left the courtroom during the lunch recess and didn't return. The real work was happening elsewhere. That evening, federal agents executed simultaneous search warrants at multiple locations: Vincent's home, the office of Dexter's personal attorney, and the small accounting firm that had managed the offshore entities. The evidence gathered was comprehensive and damning. Electronic records, physical documents, witness statements, the full architecture of the embezzlement scheme laid bare. When court reconvened the next morning, the prosecution requested a brief recess to confer with the judge. What followed was a seismic shift in the proceedings. New charges were filed, additional defendants named. The scope of the case expanded dramatically. I wasn't in the courtroom when it happened, but Geneva was. She described the moment Dexter realized what was happening, how his composure cracked as the judge detailed the new evidence, how he turned to his attorney in growing panic, how his eyes darted around the courtroom, seeking escape that didn't exist. By evening, the story dominated business news. Massive fraud scheme uncovered. Multiple executives implicated. Tens of millions diverted to private accounts. Vincent was arrested, leaving his home with packed suitcases and multiple passports. 2 other executives, both loyal Dexter allies who had left the company during the initial investigation, were taken into custody at airports. Dexter's attorney requested an emergency bail hearing, citing changed circumstances. The judge denied the request. deeming him an enhanced flight risk given the expanded charges. For the next 2 weeks, I focused entirely on steadying the company through this new phase of the crisis: employee communications, investor briefings, customer reassurance. The work was intense but necessary. The trial resumed with a dramatically different tone. The confident defendant was replaced by a visibly shaken man in detention center attire. His high-powered defense team, recognizing the overwhelming evidence, shifted strategy toward damage mitigation. Plea negotiations began. The prosecution, armed with ironclad documentation of years of deliberate fraud, held the stronger position. 3 days later, Geneva called. It's done. Dexter's accepted a plea deal. The terms were severe: guilty pleas to 14 federal charges, forfeiture of all ill-gotten assets, and a recommended sentence of 18 to 22 years. His attorney tried to include a non-disclosure provision, Geneva added. The prosecutor refused. That detail mattered. No confidentiality meant the full story could be told, not just the legal outcome, but the human impact of Dexter's actions. The following morning, I received an unexpected request. Dexter wanted to meet with me before his formal sentencing. No attorneys present, just the two of us. Every instinct warned against it. There was nothing to gain. The legal outcome was settled. The company was moving forward. Yet something compelled me to agree. Perhaps the need for closure. Perhaps curiosity about what he could possibly want to say. The meeting was arranged in a small conference room at the Federal Detention Center. I arrived early, underwent security screening, and waited in the sterile space. When Dexter entered, I barely recognized him. The physical transformation was startling. His carefully maintained appearance had deteriorated. The confident posture replaced by a defeated slouch. Only his eyes retained their calculating intensity. He sat across from me, hands folded on the table. Neither of us spoke immediately, the silence stretching uncomfortably. "Thank you for coming," he finally said, his voice rougher than I remembered. I nodded but offered nothing more. "I wanted to understand," he continued, "how you did it, how you managed to unravel everything so completely." "You mean how we discovered your fraud?" I asked. "That was inevitable once we started looking closely." He shook his head. "Not the discovery, the execution, the way you orchestrated it all. It was," he hesitated, "it was masterful. The compliment, if that's what it was, felt hollow." "There was no master plan, Dexter. Just a commitment to transparency and accountability." He studied me, searching for something in my expression. "You expect me to believe this wasn't about revenge? That you didn't carefully calculate each step to ensure maximum damage?" "I didn't need to calculate anything," I replied evenly. "Your actions created their own consequences." He leaned forward, voice dropping. "You gathered evidence for years. You built alliances with board members. You positioned yourself perfectly to take control when the moment came. Then you systematically dismantled everything I built. Is that how you see it?" I asked. "That I orchestrated your downfall rather than you creating it yourself?" "We both know what really happened," he insisted. "You waited. You planned. You executed when I was vulnerable." I considered his perspective, how different it was from reality, yet how consistent with his worldview. He couldn't conceive of actions not driven by the same predatory calculation that guided his own choices. "What do you want from this conversation, Dexter?" His expression shifted, something almost like respect crossing his features. "To acknowledge a worthy opponent. You beat me at my own game. That's where you're wrong," I said. "I never played your game. I refused to." "Then, what would you call this?" He gestured to his detention center uniform. "I'm facing 2 decades in prison. My assets are seized. My reputation destroyed. If that's not victory for you, what is?" I thought carefully before answering. "Justice isn't victory. It's restoration. It's making things right." He laughed, a harsh sound without humor. Noble sentiments from the person sitting on the other side of the table. "This isn't about where either of us is sitting," I replied. "It's about choices and consequences." His expression hardened. "Save the moral lecture. We both know you're enjoying this. The perfect revenge served cold." I stood, suddenly tired of the conversation. "That's the difference between us, Dexter. You think this was about you? It never was. It was about the company, the employees, the customers, the investors, all the people harmed by your actions. As I turned to leave, he called after me. When you're sitting in that office, making the hard decisions year after year, you'll understand. You'll become me eventually. Everyone does. I paused at the door, looking back at him. No, Dexter. That's just what you tell yourself to justify your choices. Not everyone chooses as you did. His face contorted with sudden anger. You think you're better? More ethical? More principled? You used me to advance your career for 15 years, then discarded me when it served your purposes. The accusation hung in the air between us. I worked for the company. I corrected him. I contributed value and was compensated for it. That's not using you. That's doing my job. The difference is that I never confused the company with myself. He stared at me, his expression unreadable. So that's it? No gloating? No satisfaction in seeing me ruined? I considered the question honestly. There's satisfaction in seeing justice done, in knowing the company can heal now, in watching employees thrive without fear. If that's what you mean, then yes, there's satisfaction. Always the perfect answer, he muttered. Always above it all. As I reached for the door handle, he spoke again, his voice different now, smaller, almost vulnerable. Was there ever a moment when you could have been convinced? In the parking garage that day, if I'd said something different, offered something else, was there any chance? The question surprised me with its naked honesty. For the first time in our 15-year history, Dexter was asking something without calculation. No, I said simply. There wasn't. I left him there, seated at the metal table in the bare conference room, and didn't look back. The formal sentencing took place 2 weeks later. 18 years in federal prison, forfeiture of $34.7 million in illegally obtained assets, restitution to the company and its shareholders. I attended with Geneva, sitting quietly as the judge delivered a scathing assessment of the damage caused by Dexter's actions, not just financial harm, but the human cost of his fraudulent leadership. When it was over, when he was led away in handcuffs, I felt no triumph, no vindication, just a quiet certainty that justice, however imperfect, had been served. In the months that followed, the company transformed. New leadership structures emphasized collaboration and transparency. Financial controls were rebuilt from the ground up. Employee-driven innovation flourished in ways that had been impossible under Dexter's regime. 1 year after Dexter's sentencing, we held a company-wide gathering, not to celebrate his downfall, but to mark how far we'd come since. Production efficiency had increased 34%. Employee retention had reached record levels. Our stock had not only recovered but exceeded its previous high. As I addressed the assembled employees, I saw something in their faces that had been missing during Dexter's tenure: genuine engagement, not performance driven by fear, but contribution powered by purpose. A company isn't buildings or products or balance sheets, I told them. It's people working together towards shared goals. Our strength comes from each voice being heard, each contribution valued. After the event, as employees returned to their departments, Pax approached me, the maintenance technician whose workflow redesign had been implemented across all facilities, reducing injuries by 62%. I never thanked you properly, he said, for listening when no one else would. I should be thanking you, I replied. Your ideas have transformed our operations. He shook his head. It's more than that. You changed the culture. People aren't afraid anymore. His words stayed with me as I walked through the production area, observing the improvements implemented over the past year. Safety modifications suggested by line workers, efficiency enhancements developed by shipping teams, quality control measures designed by inspection staff. All ideas that would have been buried under Dexter's leadership were now driving our success. That evening, alone in my office, I opened my desk drawer and removed a small notebook, not Dexter's record of leverage, but my own record of 15 years working under his management. Every idea dismissed, every contribution appropriated, every subtle sabotage documented with dates, times, and witnesses. I had never needed to use it. The evidence of his financial crimes had been more than sufficient for justice to be served. I placed the notebook in the shredder, watching as the pages disappeared. The past was finished. The future awaited. As I prepared to leave, Geneva called. "Have you seen the interview?" "What interview?" "Kara's, Dexter's wife. She's gone public with everything. His psychological abuse, how he manipulated everyone around him, the pressure he put on executives to participate in his schemes." I hadn't seen it, but wasn't surprised. The protective structures Dexter had built were collapsing one by one. "Will it affect the company?" I asked. "Surprisingly, no," Geneva replied. "She's focused on him as an individual, not the business. If anything, it reinforces that the problem was isolated leadership, not systemic corruption." After we hung up, I stood at the window overlooking the main campus. Lights shone in various buildings as teams worked on projects they believed in. The parking lot was still half full despite the late hour, not because of mandatory overtime, but because of genuine engagement with meaningful work. This was the true revenge, I realized. Not Dexter's imprisonment or financial ruin, but the thriving community that had emerged from his shadow. Every innovative idea implemented, every collaborative team formed, every employee voice heard, these were the repudiations of his leadership philosophy. He had built a company on fear, control, and personal gain. We had rebuilt it on trust, collaboration, and shared purpose. In the end, my revenge wasn't destroying Dexter. It was creating something he could never understand, a company where success came from empowering others rather than exploiting them. 2 years after taking the CEO position, I received a letter from the Federal Correctional Facility where Dexter was serving his sentence. I hesitated before opening it, unsure what more could be said between us. The contents were brief. "You were right. Not everyone chooses as I did." No explanation. No context. Just those 9 words in his distinctive handwriting. I never responded. Some conversations are better left concluded. The company continued to evolve. New products, new markets, new approaches to long-standing challenges. The scandal gradually faded from public memory, replaced by recognition of our innovations and workplace practices. 5 years after Dexter's sentencing, we received an unexpected honor, being named Most Ethical Corporation by an international business association. The award cited our transparency, employee empowerment, and community impact. As I accepted the recognition on behalf of our team, I thought about the journey from answering phones to leading a transformed organization, about choices made at critical moments, about the different paths available to anyone in a position of influence. The true measure of leadership, I'd learned, wasn't power over others but power shared with them. Not control, but cultivation. Not dominance, but development. That understanding was the ultimate victory, not over Dexter, but over the philosophy he embodied. If you found this story of corporate accountability and transformation meaningful, please like and subscribe for more narratives that explore justice, leadership, and the human dynamics of professional environments. Share in the comments your own experiences with workplace transformation and what you believe makes truly ethical leadership. Your stories matter, and they help others recognize that positive change is always possible, even in the most challenging circumstances. She's just not valuable enough for this organization. My supervisor's declaration breaks the silence of the strategy meeting. I stand motionless outside the glass conference room, my reflection ghosting over their faces. 8 executives nod in agreement, their consent a physical weight pressing against my chest. For 3 years, I've poured everything into this company, my ideas, my weekends, my health, yet here they sit, casually erasing me. Then it happens. The regional VP walks in unannounced. I hadn't expected him until tomorrow. "Who's not valuable?" he asks, eyebrows raised. "The woman who just saved us $9.3 million?" The air shifts. My supervisor's smile wilts. "Why isn't she here?" The VP scans the room. Nobody moves. Nobody speaks. What they don't know is that I'm exactly where I plan to be. Outside looking in, documenting every word, every nod, every betrayal, the final pieces clicking into place for what comes next. Before I reveal how I engineered this moment, you need to understand the complete story. Listen until the end because what happens after this meeting transforms not just my career, but an entire organization. The revenge I've designed isn't quick or simple. It's something much more satisfying. And honestly, you'll want to hear how a woman they underestimated for years finally makes them pay without losing herself in the process. My name is Nadia Weaver. At 34, I'm a materials engineer with a mind that sees patterns others miss. I can spot a structural inconsistency from a data set that most experts would declare flawless. This ability made me invaluable in my previous position, where I helped develop lightweight components for medical devices. I joined this manufacturing company excited about scaling my impact, creating materials that would help millions rather than thousands. When I first met my supervisor, Alton Pierce, he seemed genuinely impressed by my credentials. "We need someone who thinks differently," he told me during my interview. "Someone who challenges conventions." His enthusiasm felt authentic, his handshake firm. The corner office with its view of the city skyline suggested someone secure in his position. My first 6 months exceeded expectations. I identified 3 efficiency improvements that reduced production costs by 17%. The team celebrated these wins, and Alton made a show of recognizing my contributions during department meetings. The shift happened gradually. It started with a testing protocol I developed for our newest product line. After presenting it to Alton privately, he suggested a few tweaks before sharing it with the broader team. When the protocol was introduced the following week, it was presented as Alton's innovative approach. My name appeared nowhere in the documentation. When I mentioned this privately, he dismissed my concern. "We're all one team here, Nadia. Everyone contributes bits and pieces." I simply synthesized various inputs. His tone made me question myself. Was I being unnecessarily territorial? Perhaps this was how things worked at larger organizations. 3 months later, it happened again. I discovered a way to reduce material waste by changing our measurement technique. I documented the process thoroughly, included implementation guidelines, and shared it with Alton. This time, he assigned Dale, a junior colleague, to review my work. 2 weeks later, my innovation was introduced as a group project led by Alton with significant contributions from Dale. The pattern continued with growing boldness. Each idea I brought forward faced the same fate: dismissed, watered down, or claimed by others. My applications for advancement were met with vague objections about my leadership qualities despite my proven technical expertise. During my second-year evaluation, I finally confronted the issue directly. "I feel my contributions aren't being recognized appropriately," I told Alton. He leaned back in his chair, his expression a practice neutral. "Nadia, recognition comes to those who demonstrate team values. Your technical skills are solid, but your ideas often lack practicality. When they succeed, it's typically because others have substantially refined them." The injustice burned, but I maintained my composure. "Can you provide specific examples of how my ideas were impractical before others refined them?" His answer revealed everything. "That's not how memory works, Nadia. We don't catalog each evolutionary step of an idea. The point is that successful innovation here is collaborative." Collaborative. The word echoed in my mind as I left his office. There was nothing collaborative about systematically taking credit for another person's work. That evening, I started keeping detailed records. Every idea, every conversation, every email. I created private documentation with timestamps and witnesses where possible. Not yet for revenge, simply for my own sanity, to confirm I wasn't imagining things. The breaking point came during winter evaluations of my 3rd year. Despite having developed a testing method that reduced quality issues by 32%, I received a rating of meets expectations, while 2 colleagues with lesser accomplishments received promotions. That night, as I drove home through the darkness, something crystallized within me. This wasn't just about recognition anymore, it was about justice. 2 weeks later, I made a crucial discovery while analyzing product return data. Our materials contained minute imperfections, invisible to standard testing, that caused failures months after purchase. These late failures were destroying customer trust and costing millions in replacement products and damaged reputation. When I brought my findings to Alton, his response was dismissive. You're overreacting to normal variance. Our return rates are within industry standards. The standard is the problem, I insisted. These failures are happening past our warranty period, so customers blame the product rather than seeking replacements. We're losing future sales, not just paying for returns. He tapped his pen against his desk calendar. Nadia, I appreciate your concern, but we have bigger priorities. Let's focus on the quarterly targets we already established. Walking away from his office, I made my decision. I would solve this problem, but this time I wouldn't hand him the solution. For the next 3 months, I worked weekends and evenings, developing both a detection system for the impurities and a modification to our process that would eliminate them. I tested my theories using company resources after hours when nobody would question what I was doing. The results were undeniable. My solution not only eliminated the impurity but actually sped up production. Instead of sharing it internally, I registered for an industry workshop where materials innovations were discussed theoretically. There, I presented the concept as a hypothetical problem without naming our company. An efficiency expert named Vincent Marquez immediately recognized its value and approached me after the session. "This isn't hypothetical, is it?" he asked quietly as others filed out of the room. I maintained my professional smile. All problems exist somewhere. "Would you be open to discussing this privately? I have some thoughts that might interest you." Vincent turned out to be a consultant who worked directly with our regional leadership team. After confirming my identity and position, he proposed bringing my solution directly to them, bypassing Alton entirely. "If what you're describing is accurate, this could save the company millions," he said. "Why haven't you raised this internally?" I explained the pattern of behavior without emotion, sticking to facts and dates. Vincent listened intently, occasionally making notes. "Unfortunately, this isn't uncommon," he finally said, "but it is fixable. Are you willing to trust me with this information? I believe I can help ensure your work is properly attributed this time." It was a risk, but one worth taking. I shared my complete solution with Vincent, including implementation details. He promised to present it to regional leadership within the week. What happened next exceeded my expectations. The regional team implemented my solution immediately, attributing it to an anonymous internal source pending verification. Within 3 months, the results were undeniable. $9.3 million saved in reduced returns and increased production efficiency. Customer satisfaction ratings climbed steadily. Throughout this period, Alton became increasingly hostile toward me. He assigned me to increasingly trivial projects, excluded me from strategic meetings, and began suggesting I might be better suited elsewhere in the organization. Vincent kept me informed of developments at the regional level. "They're extremely impressed with the solution," he told me. "They're also concerned about why something this significant had to come through back channels. I've shared some of what you told me, and they've begun watching more closely." I continued gathering evidence, now with renewed purpose. I collected witness statements from teammates who had seen the pattern. I assembled proof of my original authorship for innovations now benefiting the company. Meanwhile, I performed my assigned tasks with perfect competence, giving Alton no legitimate reason to criticize my work. Then came the strategy meeting, the one I was deliberately excluded from. Vincent had warned me it was coming. "They're discussing departmental reorganization," he said. "Alton has suggested eliminating your position as redundant. Be prepared." So I positioned myself where I could observe through the glass wall, recording everything on my phone in my pocket. I watched as my career was casually dismissed by people who had benefited from my work for years. And then, right on cue, the regional VP walked in. Now, as executives shift uncomfortably in their seats, I remain perfectly still, observing the scene I helped orchestrate. The VP places a folder on the table. Inside are documents proving my contributions, evidence Vincent has been helping me compile for months. "I'd like everyone to review these materials," the VP says. "Then we'll discuss why one of our most valuable innovators." Click the bell icon so you don't miss the conclusion. Because what happens next will change how you think about workplace justice forever. The executives flip through the documents, expressions shifting from confusion to concern. Some glance toward me, suddenly aware of my presence outside the glass. Alton's face flushes as he skims through the evidence. Timestamps of my original submissions matched against his later presentations, witness statements from team members, data trails showing my access to systems during weekend hours when I developed the solution. "This is a misunderstanding," Alton says, his voice carrying through the partially open door. "Nadia is talented technically, but these innovations required significant refinement before implementation. My role was to make her rough concepts viable." The VP, Christopher Reed, raises his hand. The efficiency analysis disagrees. The implemented solution matches her original documentation with 97% fidelity. The timeline also raises questions. Why did this critical improvement come through an external channel rather than your department's normal processes? Alton adjusts his tie. Sometimes the official channels can slow innovation. I was planning to bring these concepts forward once properly developed. Christopher's expression remains neutral, but his voice sharpens. "According to Ms. Weaver's performance reviews, you've consistently rated her innovations as impractical and lacking business perspective. Yet, this solution she developed independently saved us millions and improved our customer satisfaction metrics by double digits." The tension in the room thickens. I remain motionless, a silent witness to the unraveling of 3 years of systematic dismissal. Christopher turns to the group. "I'd like everyone except Alton to step out for 15 minutes. Please use this time to review these materials thoroughly." As executives file past me, their eyes avoid mine. Some look genuinely shocked, others embarrassed. I move away from the door, maintaining my composure despite the emotions surging through me. This moment isn't about satisfaction, it's about validation. Proof that I wasn't imagining things, proof that my work matters. Vincent appears at my elbow, speaking quietly. "You should join the VP in 10 minutes. He'll text you." Exactly 10 minutes later, my phone vibrates with a message. When I enter the conference room, Alton is gone. Christopher stands by the window, his reflection doubled against the city backdrop. "Ms. Weaver," he says, turning to face me, "please sit down." I take a seat, keeping my expression neutral despite my racing heart. "First, I want to apologize on behalf of the company. What you've experienced contradicts our stated values and hampers our ability to innovate effectively." I maintain eye contact. "Thank you for acknowledging that. What happens now?" "That depends partly on you." He sits across from me. Alton has been removed from his supervisory position, effective immediately. He's been offered a lateral position in another division with no direct reports. His acceptance is pending. The news lands without the triumph I might have expected. Instead, I feel a strange emptiness, the absence of a weight I've carried for years. Christopher continues. "We're creating a new innovation incubator division focused on materials engineering excellence. Our executive team has asked for my recommendation on who should lead it." My breath catches. "I'd like to recommend you, Ms. Weaver. You'd have director-level authority equal to Alton's former position, with a mandate to implement changes across our manufacturing processes. You'd report directly to me. The offer is everything I should want: recognition, advancement, the authority to implement my ideas without interference. Yet something holds me back. Before I answer, I say carefully, I need to understand why this happened in the first place. Not just with Alton, but with an entire system that allowed it to continue for 3 years. 8 executives in that meeting nodded when he called me dispensable. HR received my complaints and did nothing. This is deeper than one supervisor. Christopher nods slowly. "You're absolutely right. That's exactly why we need someone like you in leadership. Someone who recognizes that technical solutions require cultural ones to succeed." He slides a folder across the table. "This is the full proposal for the new division. It includes budget for you to build your own team and a mandate to audit our current innovation processes across departments." I open the folder, scanning the details. The position offers substantial authority to implement structural changes, not just technical ones. My first assignment would be conducting a comprehensive innovation audit of all departments, beginning with my former team. "I need 24 hours to consider this," I say. "Of course, though I should mention, Your first assignment would include reviewing all innovations attributed to your former department over the past 5 years, with full authority to correct attributions and recommending compensation adjustments where appropriate. The implications are clear. I would have the power to ensure everyone who had their ideas stolen receives proper credit and compensation. Not just me, everyone. I'll have my answer tomorrow, I say, standing to leave. That evening, I sit on my apartment balcony, watching the city lights flicker against the darkening sky. The vindication I'd imagined feels different in reality, more somber, more complex. I call my older sister, Imani, the only person who heard every detail of my struggle these past years. They offered me everything I wanted, I tell her. Authority, recognition, the chance to fix the system. But, she asks, knowing me too well, but I don't know if I want to stay in a place that required this much pain before seeing my value. Imani is quiet for a moment. What would you tell someone else in your position? The question clarifies something for me. I'd tell them that sometimes fixing a broken system from within is more powerful than walking away, that their experience gives them insight others lack. Then you have your answer, she says. This isn't about forgiveness. It's about transformation. You've earned the right to create the environment you needed but never had. The next morning, I accept the position with 2 conditions. First, that the company implements mandatory attribution protocols for all innovations. Second, that they create transparent promotion criteria based on measurable contributions rather than subjective assessments. Christopher agrees without hesitation. When can you start? Monday, I say. I'll need the weekend to prepare. My first week as innovation director passes in a blur of meetings and introductions. I assemble a preliminary team, including 2 colleagues who had privately supported me during Alton's tenure. I request all documentation from the past 5 years of projects, not just final reports, but every email, every draft, every meeting note. When I encounter resistance from certain department heads, Christopher intervenes personally. This audit has full executive support. Any obstruction will be noted in the final report. By week 3, patterns emerge. Alton wasn't unique. 3 other supervisors show similar habits of claiming subordinates' work. More disturbing are the demographic patterns in whose ideas get appropriated and whose get credited. The data tells a story of systemic bias, masked as teamwork and collaborative development. I compile my findings methodically, including recommendations for structural changes and specific instances requiring correction. The report identifies 27 employees whose contributions were systematically minimized or attributed to others. For each, I include a rectification plan with appropriate recognition and compensation adjustments. The day before presenting my findings to the executive team, I receive an unexpected visitor. Alton stands in my office doorway, visibly uncomfortable. "Do you have a minute?" he asks. I gesture to the chair across from my desk, maintaining a neutral expression. "I've been doing some reflection," he begins. "The past month has been illuminating." I wait without offering assistance. This moment belongs to him. "I've realized that my behavior was inexcusable, not just to you, but to others over the years." He places a folder on my desk. This contains my own audit of projects I supervised. I've identified every instance where I failed to properly attribute contributions. It includes names, dates, and my personal assessment of credit misattribution. The admission surprises me. "What prompted this?" "Your promotion announcement included your mandate to audit innovation attribution." I realized 2 things. First, that this would eventually reach me regardless. Second, that I had a choice about how to face it. He gestures to the folder. This doesn't undo the damage, but it's a start toward accountability. I open the folder, scanning its contents. His assessment largely matches my own findings, with a few additions I hadn't yet discovered. "I appreciate this initiative," I say carefully. "It will be incorporated into my final report." Alton nods. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm committed to changing how I work with others going forward." After he leaves, I sit with this unexpected development. His acknowledgement doesn't erase 3 years of struggle, but it represents something significant, the beginning of actual change. The following day, I present my complete findings to the executive team. The room falls silent as I detail the patterns of attribution failure and their impacts on both innovation and employee retention. I outline specific recommendations for systemic changes, including new documentation protocols, attribution requirements for all projects, and adjustments to promotion criteria. Implementation will require significant cultural change, I conclude, but the return on investment is clear. When people receive proper credit for their innovations, they produce more of them. Our current system actively discourages the creativity we claim to value. Christopher speaks first. These findings are disturbing but necessary. I move that we implement Ms. Weaver's recommendations in full, beginning with the attribution corrections and compensation adjustments. The vote is unanimous. Over the next 6 months, I lead the transformation of our innovation processes. We implement clear attribution protocols, restructure reporting relationships, and create transparent criteria for advancement. Most importantly, we establish consequences for supervisors who claim subordinates' work as their own. The most powerful change comes in the form of public corrections. In a company-wide meeting, Christopher announces formal recognition for the 27 employees identified in my audit, including retroactive bonuses for significant contributions. The message is unmistakable. This behavior will no longer be tolerated. Alton remains with the company in his reduced role. He becomes an unexpected ally in the transformation, speaking openly about his past behavior in management training sessions. His example makes it harder for others to deny similar tendencies in themselves. 1 year after that fateful strategy meeting, I stand at the podium during our annual innovation conference. Our company has just announced record profits, with customer satisfaction at an all-time high. New product development has accelerated by 34%, with broader participation across all departments. Innovation thrives on attribution, I tell the assembled employees. When people know their ideas will be recognized, they offer them freely. When credit is stolen, ideas stay hidden. The past year has proven that integrity and profitability aren't competing values, they're complementary ones. As I scan the audience, I spot Alton in the back row. He meets my gaze and nods slightly, an acknowledgement of how far we've both come. My revenge wasn't his destruction. It was transforming the system that enabled him, creating something better for everyone, including myself. After the conference, Vincent finds me by the refreshment table. "You've created quite a legacy here," he says. "Was it worth staying?" I consider the question seriously. Revenge would have been leaving them to continue failing. Justice was helping them change. This wasn't just about setting things right for me. It was about ensuring nobody else experiences what I did. He raises his water glass in a subtle toast. To transformation, then. I smile, clinking my glass against his. To transformation. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been in a situation where your contributions went unrecognized? How did you handle it? Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't destroying your opponents. It's transforming the system that gave them power in the first place. Like this video if you believe in standing up for what's right, and subscribe for more stories about justice that comes in unexpected forms. Remember, your worth isn't determined by others' recognition, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't fight for it. "You don't deserve this promotion," Everett whispered, deliberately pulling his hand away as mine hung extended before the entire department. 30 colleagues watched in stunned silence during what should have been my celebratory moment. The conference room felt like it had been drained of oxygen as Everett turned his back on me to chat with board members, leaving me standing alone on the small platform. My fingers curled into my palm, a quiet surrender. 2 years of stolen ideas, dismissed suggestions, and conveniently scheduled meetings that ensured I'd miss important presentations had culminated in this moment of public humiliation. The Crystal Award, in my other hand, engraved with Excellence in Innovation, suddenly felt heavier than it should. I forced my lips into a smile that felt like a grimace and stepped down from the platform, navigating through sympathetic glances and awkward shoulder pats. But beneath my embarrassment burned something fiercer: certainty. Because whatever it didn't know, what no one at Bloom Design Studios knew, was that for 3 years, I'd been serving as a respected judge for the International Design Innovation Committee, evaluating breakthrough concepts from across the globe under strict confidentiality. And in exactly 8 weeks, Everett's revolutionary project would be sitting before me at the judge's table. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. Have you ever stood in a room full of people and felt completely invisible? That's how I felt every day at this company, despite being the one who kept the lights on. If you've ever been underestimated or pushed aside, stick with me until the end, because this story isn't just about revenge, it's about restoration. My name is Phoebe Thaler. I'm 32, and until that promotion ceremony, I'd spent 4 years as a sustainability analyst at Bloom, a mid-sized design firm that specialized in eco-friendly product development. I was hired for my master's research on biodegradable polymers, but Everett quickly relegated me to background tasks while presenting my findings as his own. I'm not naturally confrontational. My grandmother raised me to believe that excellence speaks for itself, that quiet persistence outlasts loud ambition. She taught me to cook without recipes, to garden by the moon's phases, and to solve problems with patience rather than force. These weren't just homespun philosophies, they were survival strategies for a woman who'd raised 3 children alone while running a small business in rural Pennsylvania. Your work should be a reflection of your character, she'd tell me, kneading bread dough with hands strong from decades of hard work, and your character should be unimpeachable. I carried those words with me through college, through graduate school, and into my professional life. Which is why, when the International Design Innovation Committee contacted me 3 years ago about serving as an anonymous judge, I accepted without hesitation. The committee operated with strict confidentiality. Judges remained unknown to prevent industry influence. My specialty was sustainability metrics, assessing how designs balanced environmental impact with practical implementation. The evaluation framework I developed was becoming the global standard in competition judging. While at work, Everett repeatedly shot down my sustainability proposals as impractical idealism. After the handshake incident, I returned to my desk, opened my personal calendar, and confirmed what I already knew. In 8 weeks, I would be leading the committee's annual championship event. The same event where Everett had submitted his project for consideration. Everything okay? I looked up to find Zeke, our IT specialist, standing at my desk. His kind eyes held genuine concern behind round glasses. "You handled that with more grace than most would have," he said quietly. I closed my calendar. Not much choice in the moment. "There's always a choice." Zeke placed a cup of herbal tea on my desk. "You could have thrown that award at his head. Very satisfying, but probably career-limiting." I laughed despite myself. "I need this job." "No," Zeke said, suddenly serious. "They need you. Everett just hasn't figured that out yet." I sipped the tea, chamomile with a hint of lavender, and felt my shoulders relax slightly. "Thanks, Zeke." "Anytime." He tapped my desk twice before walking away. "Some people build their castles by knocking down everyone else's. Doesn't make them stronger, just makes them the only one left standing." As I watched him go, something shifted inside me. I'd been playing defense for years, trying to protect my ideas while Everett claimed them as his own. Maybe it was time to change strategies. For the next 2 months, I maintained professional distance. I completed assignments, attended meetings, and watched Everett swagger through the office, bragging about his upcoming competition entry. He'd invested everything in this project. Personal savings, borrowed resources, countless weekends. Winning would make his career. Losing would devastate him financially and professionally. What he didn't know was that his revolutionary sustainable packaging design, the one he'd been developing in secret, was built on principles I'd outlined in a proposal he'd rejected 9 months earlier. He'd dismissed my ideas as unrealistic in our team meeting, then quietly incorporated them into his personal project. I could have confronted him. I could have reported him to the board. But something held me back, not fear, but curiosity. I wanted to see how far he would go, how completely he would claim my concepts as his own. One Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks before the competition, Everett called an all-hands meeting. The entire design team gathered in the conference room as he unveiled mock-ups of his competition entry. "This," he announced, gesturing to the sleek display, "is the future of sustainable packaging." The design was familiar, too familiar. It was my biopolymer concept, refined and polished, but unmistakably mine. From the molecular structure to the manufacturing process, I could see my fingerprints all over it. But he'd added one element I hadn't considered: traditional basket weaving patterns from various indigenous cultures, incorporated into the polymer matrix to add structural integrity. The inspiration came to me during a documentary about ancient crafting techniques, he explained to the rapt audience. Nature's solutions hidden in plain sight all these centuries. I felt a chill run through me, not because he'd stolen my work. I'd expected that, but because he was now appropriating indigenous knowledge without attribution. The competition had strict ethical guidelines about cultural attribution and acknowledgement. As colleagues asked questions and offered congratulations, I quietly took notes, not on the design itself, but on his claims of originality. Each statement, each assertion of "my breakthrough" and "my discovery" was another nail in a coffin he didn't yet know he was building. Later that week, I received an email from the competition chairperson, Dr. Layla Mori. The judging panel would be instituting a new preliminary evaluation category this year: ethical sourcing and attribution. As lead judge, I was asked to develop the criteria. I stared at my screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard. This wasn't an opportunity for revenge. It was an opportunity for correction. The standards I would write wouldn't just affect Everett's entry. They would shape how the entire industry approached innovation and acknowledgement. That night, I stayed late at the office, drafting guidelines that would become the foundation for a new industry standard. 1. Clear documentation of all conceptual influences. 2. Proper attribution of cultural and traditional knowledge. 3. Transparent supply chain reporting. 4. Acknowledgement of collaborative contributions. These weren't designed to target Everett specifically. They were principles I genuinely believed should guide ethical design. The fact that his project violated several of these points wasn't personal. It was simply a reflection of his approach to innovation. The following Monday, with just 2 weeks until the competition, Everett called me into his office. His expression was uncharacteristically conciliatory as he gestured for me to sit. "Phoebe," he began, leaning forward across his desk, "I've been reflecting on the promotion ceremony, and I want to apologize for my behavior." I kept my face neutral, though surprise rippled through me. In 4 years, I'd never heard Everett apologize to anyone. "It was unprofessional," he continued, "and not reflective of the high standards we maintain at Bloom." His eyes never quite met mine, focusing instead on a point just beyond my shoulder. "Thank you for acknowledging that," I said carefully. "In the spirit of moving forward positively, I'd like you to join my team for the International Design Competition next month. Your sustainability expertise could be valuable as we prepare the final presentation." And there it was, the real reason for this sudden apology. He needed my expertise but wasn't willing to acknowledge that the core concept was already mine. "That's an interesting offer," I replied, keeping my voice level. "What aspects of the project would you like me to contribute to?" He smiled, relaxing slightly. "Some final refinements to the sustainability metrics, perhaps some help with the technical documentation. Nothing major. The design is essentially complete, but your attention to detail could help us edge out the competition." I nodded slowly. "I'll need to check my schedule. The next few weeks are quite busy with the quarterly reports." "Of course," he said smoothly, "but this is a priority project. I'm sure we can adjust your other responsibilities." As I left his office, a plan began forming in my mind. Not a plan for revenge, but for revelation. The committee chairperson had scheduled a call for tomorrow, a routine check-in before the competition. What if it happened during our staff meeting? What if everyone heard exactly who I was in the design world? That night, I emailed Dr. Mori with a request. For the first time in 3 years, I asked to break protocol. The next morning, our weekly staff meeting began as usual. Everett was reviewing the quarterly projections when my phone rang. I deliberately left the sound on. "I'm sorry," I said, pulling out my phone. "It's the International Design Committee. Would you mind if I take this quickly? They're expecting my input on the championship event." Everett frowned but waved his permission, likely assuming I was handling some administrative detail for the competition he'd entered. I answered and put the phone on speaker. "Dr. Mori, good morning. I'm actually in a staff meeting. Do you mind if I put you on speaker?" "Not at all, Phoebe," came the clear, authoritative voice of the committee chairperson. "I wanted to confirm the details for next month. We need our lead judge to arrive 2 days early to oversee the preliminary evaluations, particularly the new ethical sourcing category you've developed." The room went silent. I watched as confusion, then dawning realization spread across Everett's face. "That works with my schedule," I replied calmly. "I've finalized the evaluation criteria for the new category and sent it to the other judges for review." "Excellent," Dr. Mori continued. "Your framework from last year's championship has been adopted by 3 other international competitions, by the way. The sustainability metrics you developed have become something of an industry standard." I could feel the weight of every gaze in the room. "That's wonderful to hear. I'm looking forward to seeing this year's entries." After a few more details, I ended the call and looked up to find 20 pairs of wide eyes staring at me. Everett's face had drained of color. "You're a judge," he said flatly, "for the competition I've entered." "I've been a judge for 3 years, I confirmed. Lead judge for sustainability metrics last year and head of the judging panel this year." The silence in the room was absolute. 4 years of dismissed ideas, stolen credit, and professional undermining hung in the balance of this moment. "I believe we were discussing the quarterly projections," I said, turning to the screen where Everett's presentation was still displayed. He opened his mouth, closed it, then nodded stiffly and continued the presentation with noticeably less enthusiasm. After the meeting, colleagues approached me one by one, asking about my role with the committee, congratulating me on the position. Everett avoided me entirely, locking himself in his office for the remainder of the day. That evening, as I packed up to leave, I found Zeke waiting by the elevator. "That was quite a revelation today," he said with a small smile. "I don't think I've ever seen Everett speechless before." I pressed the elevator button. "It wasn't planned that way." "Wasn't it?" Zeke raised an eyebrow. "Because it looked an awful lot like the most elegant professional checkmate I've ever witnessed." The elevator doors opened and we stepped inside. "What happens now?" he asked as we descended. "With the competition, I mean." I considered this carefully. I judge his entry fairly, according to the established criteria, including the new ethical sourcing standards. And if it fails those standards? The elevator reached the ground floor and the doors opened to the lobby. "Then it fails those standards," I said simply. "This isn't about revenge, Zeke. It's about integrity." As we walked through the lobby, Zeke shook his head admiringly. "You know, most people, after being treated the way you've been treated, would be planning something much more dramatic." I pushed open the door to the cool evening air. My grandmother used to say that the most powerful response to dishonesty isn't more dishonesty, it's radical transparency. Over the next 2 weeks, Everett made numerous attempts to speak with me privately. I maintained professional courtesy but declined any discussion of the competition. The ethical guidelines had been published on the committee's website. The same standards would apply to every entry, including his. The competition was held in a renovated industrial space in Copenhagen, all exposed brick and massive windows overlooking the harbor. Designers from 26 countries had gathered, their innovations arranged on pristine white pedestals throughout the cavernous main hall. As lead judge, I arrived 2 days early to oversee preparations and meet with the other judges, renowned experts in industrial design, materials science, and cultural studies. The atmosphere was collegial but focused. We all understood the responsibility of our positions. On the morning entries arrived, I walked the empty exhibition hall alone, reviewing the judging framework I'd developed. My footsteps echoed on the polished concrete as I mentally prepared for the impartiality the next 3 days would require. Phoebe. I turned to find Everett standing near the entrance, a shipping crate beside him. His travel suit looked rumpled, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. Everett, I acknowledged with a professional nod. The competitor check-in is at the south entrance. He stepped forward, leaving his crate behind. We need to talk. About the competition, I'm afraid that would be inappropriate given my position. About us, he said, lowering his voice. About our working relationship. I maintain the professional distance between us. This isn't the time or place for that discussion. You could recuse yourself, he suggested, his tone carefully casual. Given our history, there's a clear conflict of interest. So that was his strategy. Get me removed from judging his entry. What history would that be exactly? The history where you've taken credit for my work for 4 years? Or the history where you publicly humiliated me at my promotion ceremony? He flinched slightly. I've already apologized for that. You apologized when you needed something from me, I corrected him. And now you're suggesting I compromise my professional ethics because it might benefit you. That's not. The judging criteria are publicly available, I continued. Every entry will be evaluated according to the same standards. If your design meets those standards, you have nothing to worry about. His expression hardened. This new ethics category, you created it specifically to target me. I created it to address a gap in how we evaluate innovation. I replied evenly. If you're concerned your entry doesn't adequately attribute its influences, perhaps that's something to reflect on. A staff member appeared at the entrance. Mr. Everett, we need to process your entry at registration. He held my gaze for a moment longer. This isn't over. Actually, I said quietly, it is. Good luck with your entry. As he walked away, I felt a strange lightness. For years, I'd shrunk myself in his presence, careful not to challenge his authority or trigger his temper. Now, standing in my own authority, I realized how much energy that constant accommodation had consumed. The competition officially opened the following morning. The judging panel spent the day reviewing written submissions and examining physical prototypes. By design, we didn't know which entries belonged to which designers during the preliminary round. Entry 42, Everett's submission, was as impressive as I'd expected. The biopolymer packaging incorporated intricate structural elements inspired by indigenous weaving patterns, creating remarkable strength with minimal material. The technical execution was flawless. But as I reviewed the documentation, the absence of attribution was glaring. The entry claimed original discovery of structural principles that had been used by indigenous cultures for centuries. There was no acknowledgement of the cultural origins, no recognition of the traditional knowledge being leveraged. That evening, the 7 judges gathered to discuss our preliminary rankings. We sat around a circular table in a private conference room, each with our notes spread before us. Entry 42 shows remarkable innovation in materials application, noted Dr. D. Kensington, the materials science expert from Edinburgh. The tensile strength achieved with such minimal polymer use is unprecedented. The manufacturing scalability is impressive as well, added Professor Amara from Lagos. This could revolutionize packaging for temperature-sensitive pharmaceuticals in developing regions. The discussion continued, with each judge highlighting different strengths of Everett's design. Then, Dr. Mori turned to me. Phoebe, you've been quiet. Your thoughts on 42? All eyes turned to me. This was the moment that would define not just Everett's future, but my own professional integrity. I could feel the weight of my grandmother's wisdom. Your character should be unimpeachable. The technical execution is exceptional, I began, keeping my voice neutral. However, I have serious concerns about the ethical framework of this entry. I opened the reference materials I'd prepared, academic papers documenting the specific weaving techniques being used, photographs of traditional baskets that clearly showed the same structural patterns, historical records of these methods dating back centuries. The entry claims original discovery of structural principles that have been in use by at least 3 indigenous cultures for generations. I explained, passing the materials around the table. There's no attribution, no acknowledgement, not even a mention of inspiration from these sources. The room grew quiet as the other judges examined my evidence. This is rather blatant, Dr. Kensington said finally, looking up from the photographs. These aren't vague similarities, these are direct applications of traditional techniques without any acknowledgement. Professor Amara nodded solemnly. Under our new ethical sourcing criteria, this is a clear violation. The discussion shifted, becoming more somber as the judges recognized the implications. Entry 42 was technically brilliant but ethically compromised. We need to be absolutely certain, Dr. Mori said, looking around the table. This decision will have significant consequences for the designer. I've provided primary sources documenting each technique, I replied. The evidence speaks for itself. By the end of the evening, we had reached consensus. Entry 42 would receive top scores for technical execution and innovation, but would fail the ethical sourcing category so completely that it couldn't advance to the final round. I returned to my hotel room that night feeling hollow rather than triumphant. This wasn't about winning or losing, it was about establishing a standard that should have existed all along. The next morning, the preliminary results were posted. Designers gathered around the digital displays, searching for their entry numbers. I watched from a distance as Everett approached the screen, confidence in his stride. I saw the moment he processed the information, his body went rigid, his hand reached out to steady himself against the wall. He turned, scanning the room until his eyes found mine. The rage in his expression was unmistakable. He started toward me, cutting through the crowd with determined steps. "You did this," he hissed when he reached me, keeping his voice low enough that only I could hear. "You deliberately sabotaged my entry." "Your entry failed to meet the published ethical criteria," I replied calmly. The decision was unanimous among all 7 judges. "Criteria you created." His face was flushed with anger. "You engineered this entire situation." "I established standards for ethical attribution that the entire judging panel endorsed." I corrected him. "Your design incorporated indigenous techniques without acknowledgement. That's not my personal opinion, it's documented fact." "You've just destroyed years of work," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Do you understand what this means for me? For my career?" For a moment, I glimpsed something I'd never seen in Everett before: vulnerability, the realization that his actions had consequences. That appropriating others' work, whether mine or indigenous creators, wasn't just unethical, it was ultimately self-defeating. "I understand exactly what it means to have years of work go unrecognized," I said quietly. "The difference is, you could have acknowledged your sources. You chose not to." Dr. Mori appeared at my side. "Is everything all right here?" "Fine," Everett said, straightening his posture and forcing a neutral expression, just congratulating the judge on her thorough evaluation process. He walked away, shoulders rigid with suppressed fury. "That looked intense," Dr. Mori observed. "He's from my company," I explained. "We have history." Her eyebrows rose. "Should you have recused yourself?" "I considered it," I admitted. "But the decision wasn't mine alone, and the evidence was clear." She nodded thoughtfully. "Integrity sometimes costs us, but it's the only currency that never devalues." The remainder of the competition proceeded without incident. Everett disappeared after the preliminary results were announced, withdrawing his entry and leaving Copenhagen without speaking to anyone. The grand prize ultimately went to a design team from South Korea, whose biodegradable packaging incorporated traditional Hanji papermaking techniques with full attribution and partnership with traditional craftspeople. When I returned to the office the following Monday, an unusual hush fell over the design department as I walked to my desk. Zeke intercepted me by the coffee machine, his expression concerned. "Everett called an emergency board meeting yesterday," he murmured. "Claimed you had a personal vendetta and abused your position as judge." My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. The judging panel was unanimous. "I have documentation." "You might need it," Zeke warned. "He's pushing for your termination." Before I could respond, my desk phone rang. The CEO's assistant was requesting my immediate presence in the boardroom. The walk to the executive floor felt endless. I'd done nothing wrong, had acted with complete professional integrity, yet now my job was in jeopardy. The irony wasn't lost on me. I might lose my position for upholding the very standards the design industry claimed to value. The boardroom door was heavy, requiring a deliberate push to open. Inside, the company's 7 board members sat along one side of a long table. Everett stood at the head, mid-presentation. He froze when I entered. "Ms. Thaler, thank you for joining us," said Amelia Brandt, the CEO. Her expression revealed nothing as she gestured to an empty chair. "Please, have a seat." I took the indicated chair, directly opposite the board members, feeling like I was facing a tribunal. The presentation screen behind Everett displayed a slide titled "Ethical Concerns, Conflict of Interest." Mr. Everett was just explaining his perspective on what occurred at the International Design Competition. Amelia continued, "He's raised concerns about potential impropriety in the judging process." I met her gaze steadily. "I understand his concerns. I'm prepared to address them." The timing of this new ethics category was clearly targeted. Everett interjected, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Phoebe used her position to enact a personal vendetta." "That's a serious accusation," Amelia noted. "Miss Thaler, your response?" I opened my laptop and connected it to the room's display system. "May I present some documentation?" At Amelia's nod, I pulled up the materials I'd shown the judging panel, the academic papers, the historical photographs, the side-by-side comparisons of indigenous techniques, and Everett's design. The ethics category wasn't created to target any specific entry, I explained, my voice calm and professional. It was established to address a gap in how innovation is evaluated. All entries were judged according to the same criteria, which were published well before the competition. I displayed the email timeline showing when the criteria were developed and published, then continued. Mr. Everett's entry incorporated these specific traditional techniques without attribution. The decision to disqualify the entry was unanimous among all 7 international judges. The board members leaned forward, examining the evidence on the screen. One of them, Dr. Kimball, looked up at Everett. "Did you incorporate these indigenous techniques?" Everett's confidence wavered visibly. "I was inspired by certain traditional approaches." "That's not what I asked," Dr. Kimball interrupted. "Did you use these specific techniques without attribution?" The room grew silent as Everett struggled to formulate a response that wouldn't incriminate him. "Finally," he said, "the design industry has always built upon existing concepts. Nothing is truly original." "That's precisely why attribution matters," I said quietly. "Innovation doesn't happen in isolation. The ethical standard isn't about not being influenced. It's about acknowledging those influences honestly." Amelia studied Everett carefully. "You called this meeting alleging that Ms. Thaler acted improperly, yet the evidence suggests she simply applied consistent standards that your entry failed to meet." "There's more," I added, bringing up a new slide. "I'd like to address Mr. Everett's claim that I was motivated by a personal vendetta." I displayed a proposal I'd submitted 9 months earlier, the one Everett had rejected in a team meeting as unrealistic idealism. Side by side with images of his competition entry, the conceptual similarities were undeniable. This proposal contains the core biopolymer concept that formed the foundation of Mr. Everett's competition entry, I explained. He rejected it publicly, then developed it privately for his own recognition. The atmosphere in the room shifted palpably. What had begun as my defense had transformed into something else entirely, an exposé of a pattern of behavior. Dr. Kimball cleared his throat. Mr. Everett, is this accurate? Did you appropriate Miss Thaler's concept after rejecting it officially? Everett's face had gone pale. The concepts evolved independently. There are bound to be similarities when working in the same field. The molecular structure is identical, Dr. Kimball pointed out, studying the screen. These aren't vague similarities. Amelia raised her hand, silencing further discussion. I think we have enough information. She turned to Everett. You called this meeting to question Miss Thaler's professional conduct. Instead, you've raised serious concerns about your own. She looked at the other board members, who nodded in silent agreement. Mr. Everett, please wait outside while we discuss this matter privately with Miss Thaler. The look Everett gave me as he left the room contained such hatred that I almost flinched. Almost. When the door closed behind him, Amelia turned to me. How long has this been going on? The appropriation of ideas? I asked. Since I joined the company 4 years ago, not just mine, other team members as well, most were too intimidated to speak up. And you've maintained documentation all this time? I nodded. I didn't plan to use it. I just needed to remember that I wasn't imagining things. The board members exchanged glances. Miss Thaler, Amelia said finally, I owe you an apology on behalf of this company. We failed to create an environment where you felt your contributions would be recognized fairly. I don't want an apology, I replied honestly. I want change, not just for me, but for everyone here with ideas worth developing. Amelia nodded slowly. What would you suggest? Transparent attribution protocols, I said without hesitation. Clear documentation of where concepts originate. Collaborative credit for collaborative work. The same ethical standards we expect in competition should apply to our daily operations. Essentially, you want to implement your international judging framework internally, Dr. Kimball observed. Yes, because innovation thrives with proper attribution, not despite it. Amelia studied me thoughtfully. We have an executive position opening up, Head of Innovation Ethics. It's a new role we've been considering for some time, but finding the right person has been challenging. She glanced at the evidence still displayed on the screen. I believe we may have found her. 3 days later, Everett cleared out his office while the department pretended not to watch. He'd been offered a choice, resignation or termination with cause. He chose the former, leaving with a cardboard box and wounded pride. I was announced as the new head of innovation ethics the following week, with a corner office and a mandate to implement attribution protocols across all departments. The promotion came with a ceremony, a small gathering in the same conference room where Everett had refused my handshake months earlier. Amelia presented me with a new award, one created specifically for the position, a crystal prism etched with the words, Transparency in Innovation. When she extended her hand, I took it without hesitation. Phoebe Thaler, she announced to the gathered employees, exemplifies the standards to which we should all aspire. Her commitment to ethical innovation will guide us into a new era of creative development. As applause filled the room, I caught Zeke's eye across the crowd. He gave me a subtle thumbs up, a quiet acknowledgement of how far I'd come. That evening, as I arranged my belongings in my new office, my phone chimed with an email notification. It was from Dr. Mori at the International Design Committee. Your attribution framework has been formally adopted by the World Design Council, she wrote. All major competitions will implement it beginning next season. You've changed the landscape, Phoebe. Proper acknowledgement of indigenous techniques is already inspiring new collaborations between designers and traditional craftspeople. I stood at my office window, watching the sunset paint the city in golden light. My grandmother's wisdom echoed in my mind. Your work should be a reflection of your character, and your character should be unimpeachable. The framework I'd created wasn't just about preventing people like Everett from taking credit for others' ideas. It was about creating a world where innovation could flourish through honest collaboration, where traditional knowledge was respected rather than exploited, where transparency was valued over self-promotion. Sometimes the most powerful form of justice isn't revenge, but reform, changing the system so thoroughly that the old ways of operating simply become impossible. A week later, I received a small package with no return address. Inside was a handcrafted woven basket, clearly made using one of the indigenous techniques Everett had attempted to claim. A note accompanied it. To the woman who reminded an industry that our foundations matter. Some of us were watching, learning, and changing because of you. Thank you for your courage. It wasn't signed, but I didn't need a signature to understand its meaning. Change rarely happens in grand, dramatic moments. It happens in the quiet, persistent application of principles. In the courage to stand in your truth, even when standing alone. If you've ever felt invisible in your workplace, if you've ever had your ideas dismissed or appropriated, know this: your perspective matters. Your contributions are valuable. And sometimes, the most powerful response to injustice isn't a direct confrontation, but the creation of a system where such injustice simply cannot thrive. Like, share, and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Your experiences matter, and sharing them helps others find the courage to stand in their truth. Remember, the most lasting revenge isn't about destroying someone else's castle. It's about building a world where everyone's foundations are acknowledged, respected, and celebrated.